Okay, hello everybody. I hope you can hear me. So, distinguished second vice president of ELF, Mr. Marco Mariani. Hello, dear speakers, dear participants, dear partners, guests, dear liberal friends. On behalf of Zavod 14, it's indeed my honor and great privilege to welcome you all at our traditional international events in autumn every year. This year we will have two events, now today, the first one and the second one, then at the end of the month. We are honestly delighted to have you here at today's event, organized in cooperation with European Liberal Forum, our distinguished partners, Friedrich Naumann Foundation, and also University of Ljubljana and Fondazione Luigi Einaudi. Zavod 14, as you already know, is a non-profit civil society. It's a full member of the European Liberal Forum and aims to promote social liberal ideas. And today's event is focused on tax issues and competitiveness in times after COVID pandemic and in a new realities like war in Ukraine, energy crisis, high inflation, forthcoming regression, and so on. Why taxes and tax competition is so important? To put it simply, our social and economic models relies on it. First, fair tax competition is essential to preserve the integrity of our social models and also our single market within the EU. And a strong, well-functioning single market will help propel Europe's return to growth and prosperity. The four freedoms which underpin our single market are fiercely protected and promoted by the Commission. However, these do not include the freedom to what you like at the expenses of your neighbor. An effective single market is one which is based on solidarity, trust, and mutual respect. Therefore, we cannot accept national measures that encourage tax shopping by citizens and businesses, and that are designed purely to steal the tax base of neighbors. Secondly, fair tax competition is crucial for the fiscal sustainability of our member states. Each member state must be able to collect the revenues that is due, and in an increasingly connected world with increasingly mobile and intangible economic activity, there needs to be a framework which enables countries to deal with the tax consequences of cross-border activities. Finally, fair tax competition is vital to protect disordered competition amongst businesses. Countries should not have to compensate for the aggressive tax planning of some companies by increasing the burden of the rest of the business community. Nor should smaller, local, and less well-advised businesses be at a disadvantage in trying to keep up their tax-avoiding competitors. Despite all these considerations, we still face many challenges to fair tax competition today. Global corporations and global cooperation between countries in their approach to taxation is limited. An uncoordinated tax design leads to unintentional double non-taxation and loopholes by abusive tax planners to exploit. Therefore, for fair tax competition, we need greater tax cooperation between member states and beyond. Nevertheless, we do not advocate an across-the-border harmonization of member state tax systems. Tax competition must be something, or should be something very positive too. Healthy and fair tax competition can contain the tendency of certain governments to use tax hikes as a solution to all their problems. It can make member states compete on the quality of their tax systems rather than on the quantity of rates. We know from many studies that tax rates are not the first and certainly not the only factor which contributes or when deciding where to invest. Reducing red tape, easing compliances, ensuring stability, and making tax administration more service-minded are fundamental to create an attractive tax system. In a nutshell, tax competition can contribute to simpler, more transparent and growth-oriented tax systems. But those positive impacts can only be materialized if the competition is fair and takes place within an agreed and transparent framework with universal accepted rules. Today, we are very proud to have opportunity to be a leading partner in our forthcoming publication, which will be presented later, titled Tax Competitiveness in the EU, a comparison between new and old member states. As I mentioned, the contributions will be presented by the authors and will serve as a starting point for the workshop and roundtable later today. Indeed, today's international event is bringing together some prominent speakers, researchers, to identify the key challenges and opportunities for the selected EU member states and also EU candidates. They will present the cases examining tax competitiveness issues in the EU, exploring difference between the new and old member states, and identify some good practices and scalable liberal solutions. Dear colleagues, just before I conclude, let me inform you that Zavod 14, together with Friedrich Neumann Foundation, has been also publishing 2 publications. One related to the disruptive technologies, and the second one, which is forthcoming, relating to the taxation. And we will continue to host another European Liberal Forum online international event on the topic of smart and green Europe at the end of this month. So on behalf of Zavod 14 and our partners, let me finally wish you an interesting and fruitful discussion and hope to meet you again at our next events. So now let's continue. I'm very happy and honored that we have a privilege that to give a floor to our second vice president of the European Liberal Forum, Mr. Marco Mariani. Mr. Mariani, please.
Thank you, dear Alexander. Thank you. Good afternoon and welcome, everyone. Welcome to this roundtable promoted by the European Liberal Forum with support of Zavod, Friedrich Naumann Foundation, and Fondazione Luigi Einaudi. First of all, thank you for taking time out and being here today. My name is Marco Mariani, as Alexander just said. I'm the second vice president of the board of the European Liberal Forum and the European Affairs Directors at Fondazione Luigi Einaudi. For those of you who do not know us yet, the European Liberal Forum is the political foundation and think tank of the ALDE party. We are working across Europe with 50 member organizations to test new ideas and for a liberal future in United Europe. As you may know, in February 2022, the ALDE party issued a report on the impact of national tax schemes on the economy and the reduction of the European Union tax gap. And it was highlighted how this matter really affects especially short, medium enterprises. So really my personal congratulations also in behalf of the European Liberal Forum for this great event that is, as you well known, dedicated to tax competitiveness in the European Liberal Forum. As I'm far to be an expert in this matter, and we have today a very rich panel of very motivational speakers, I pass the floor to Alexander, and thank you again for giving the privilege to this welcome speech. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mariani, for your speech and your welcome words. Of course, as you mentioned, you are very familiar with this topic, and I'm sure that the audience is keen to hear some new insights regarding the taxation in the EU and beyond, because at the later stage we have also a speaker from the United States, so we will try to see also this comparative in comparative perspective. So now I would like to give a floor to our moderators, to Dr. Nina Tomasevic. Nina, please, you may take the floor.
Okay, thank you very much. I would also like to welcome all who joined our event. I would like to let you know that the event is being recorded. And firstly, we will see 8 presentations of our authors who posted their papers to our publication, and they're coming from different European countries. I would kindly ask you to take each maximum 10 minutes. And for others who also joined to listen to these presentations, I would like to let you know that you are welcome with your questions. You can put them into chat during the presentations, and then the presenters will answer them at the end of the together after finishing. You can also ask directly live via camera or microphone, and we will leave this space for questions and answers at the end of all presentations. So as already Alexander and Mr. Mariani said, the main theme of the event is tax competitiveness in the European Union. And despite the unified monetary policies in Europe, there are still differences in tax systems, especially between Western or so-called old and Eastern so-called new countries. And still there are new candidate countries coming in. What about them? So let's listen to the findings of our presenters from different countries. And the first will be Séverine Mengai, coming from France. I will shortly present all the authors and participants. So Séverine is coming from France, from the University of Paris, and she's associate professor. Her main research topics are policy mix in a monetary union, coordination between budgetary authorities and public debt. And she's employed in the Department of Social Sciences at University of Paris. So she will present the fiscal policies and economic growth in the European Union. Mainly, what are the solutions of these fiscal policies, in which way they are beneficial in terms of supporting economic growth. So, Séverine, I would kindly ask you to prepare the first presentation. Thank you.
Yes. I don't know if you've seen the presentation.
Yes, okay, you just can put full screen and then move to the next slide. Okay, we can see.
It's okay for the presentation? Oh, I don't know.
Yes, you can only enlarge the slides, please.
I don't. It's not working. Ah, yes, like this. Is it okay like this?
Yes, now it is.
Okay, thank you. So thank you very much for this invitation. I'm very glad to be here today with you. So the first paper is about fiscal policies and economic growth in the European Union. An expansionary fiscal policy can have opposite consequences in the theoretical as well as in the empirical economic literature. It can increase growth. This is a Keynesian effect. It can increase global demand, private consumption and investment, but it can also decrease economic growth. This is a non-Keynesian or Ricardian effect if, for example, the public indebtedness level is too high. So the goal of this chapter is to shed light on potential link between fiscal and taxation policies and economic growth or competitiveness. And the framework of the European Union is then interesting to study. Indeed, in the European Monetary Union, fiscal policies remain the only independent instrument for national governments. However, fiscal competition reduces the fiscal autonomy of national government, and a beginning of tax harmonization has taken place in the EU. And so in 2004, the accession of new member countries in the European Union implied an increase in tax competition and a decrease of the tax burden in Europe. The public choice theory considered that such a decrease in the public sector is beneficial, whereas endogenous growth theories consider that productive public investment should be preserved. So what are the consequences of heterogeneous structures of direct and indirect taxation and of the huge divergences in the weight of fiscal resources in the European Union on economic growth? So first, I will give some status fact about public growth and fiscal policies in Europe. First, regarding public expenditure and economic growth, correlations show that economic growth, real GDP, GDP per head, and exports are all higher in countries where the share of public expenditure in GDP is weak. So this share of public expenditure in GDP is weak, for example, in countries like Ireland, but also in Estonia. And then in these countries, economic growth seems higher, but economic growth is also correlated with a decrease of this share of public expenditure in GDP. When the share of public expenditure in GDP decreases, economic growth seems to be higher. Indeed, a higher level of public consumption is mainly necessary in case of recession and when economic growth is weak. So the second status fact is about the correlation between the structure of fiscal resources and economic growth. And then we can see that economic growth seems higher in countries where the share of social security contributions in GDP decreases. This is a status fact that we can see in the empirical correlations, but we can also observe that economic growth is very slightly correlated with a higher share of indirect taxes in GDP, like in new member countries or in Ireland. The global correlation is also slightly negative if we consider the increase of direct taxes and various indicators of economic growth. So it seems that in European countries, labor taxation would be more discretionary than consumption taxation, and shifting the tax burden from direct to indirect taxes could be growth friendly, and there could be competitiveness gains in the long term if we shift the tax burden from direct to indirect taxes. And the last status fact that we can observe is between the structure of fiscal resources and net exports. And then we can show that there is a strong positive correlation between the relative weight of direct in comparison with indirect taxes and the share of net exports in GDP. This is the last correlation. Then we can verify if this correlation can be effective in some old and new member countries regarding all member states. For example, in France, the weight of public expenditure is one of the highest in Europe, 51.9% of GDP in 2021. The implicit tax rate on corporate income tax is the highest in all the European Union, and the tax burden on labor is among the highest in all OECD countries. And in particular, the weight of social security contribution is particularly high. And then we can observe, as mentioned by our last status fact, that the relative share of indirect taxes increased in France, and in correlation with this higher share of indirect taxes, external balances deteriorated and the current account balance became negative in France. Regarding Germany, direct taxes have a high weight in Germany, and this higher share of direct taxes was correlated with a high current account surplus and share net export in GDP, as mentioned by our last status fact. And this was due to the gain in productivity and competitiveness, but also to non-price competitiveness, naturally, of German products. Regarding Ireland, the share of public expenditure in GDP is weaker than other EU member states, 24.3% of GDP in 2021. It strongly decreased after 2010, whereas GDP was higher than in the rest of the EU. So this decrease of the share of public expenditure is really correlated with a higher economic growth. And we can also see that the weaker relative share of direct taxes in Ireland is correlated with a higher economic growth in general. Now, regarding 3 new member states, we can observe in Slovenia that the share of direct taxes in global revenue has long been much weaker than the rest of the EU. And social security contributions have a high weight. Labor taxation is very high in Slovenia, in particular social security contributions. And the higher relative share of direct taxes is correlated with a higher average growth rate than in the rest of the European Union. There is also a positive link between the increasing relative share of direct taxes and the growing share of net exports in GDP. Regarding Estonia, we can also see that, well, I'm going to go quickly because it's already, yes. Well, so I'm going to the conclusion because I do not want to take too much time. So a weaker share, the still is fact that I mentioned in the paper are the following. A weaker share of public expenditure in GDP as mainly in Ireland, but also in Estonia, as well as a decrease of this share correlated with the higher economic growth. And so the first policy recommendation could be to limit the share of public expenditure in GDP. Higher relative share of indirect taxes is mainly correlated with the higher economic growth. Indeed, indirect taxation has a higher weight in Ireland or in new European countries like mainly in Croatia, but also in Slovenia and Estonia, where economic growth is also on average higher. Therefore, the second policy recommendation would be to shift the tax burden from direct rate to indirect taxation in order to increase economic growth. And the last observation is that the relative share of direct taxes is positively correlated with the share of net exports in GDP. Indeed, a higher relative share of direct taxes, like in Germany, seems correlated with a higher current account surplus. On the contrary, a higher relative share of indirect taxes, like in Croatia or Estonia, but also in France, is correlated with a higher current account deficit. So increasing the relative share of direct taxes could improve the current account balance, but the danger would then be to make a country more dependent on external demand. So shifting the tax burden from direct to indirect taxation could favor economic growth, and economic growth which is less dependent on external demand. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Severin. Thank you very much. As I said, all the comments, all the questions are welcomed in the chat during the presentations or at the end. So the next one is Isabella Cuguzzi, coming from Italy. She's employed in Fondazione Luigi Einaudi, and she is a tax lawyer and researcher. All of our guests today are, of course, authors of different scientific journals and monographs, and they are participating at international scientific seminars and congresses and conferences, and I will not be repeating this for each of them. Isabella does research in tax law, in criminal law, and international tax law. And since 2020, she has been working as a tax counsel of Italian Ministry of Economic and Finance, and providing her technical support for G20 activities in international tax matters. As far as her paper is concerned, she will present the strategic role of tax in the new European order by discussing the relationship between encouraging competitiveness and discouraging harmful tax competition. Okay. Isabella?
Yes, I am here, even if I am using a profile of my colleague. Sorry for the name, I didn't have time to correct it. I don't know if you see, I'm sharing the screen. You see the slide? Do you see?
Yeah, the slide, maybe you can share as a full screen. Hope it remains like this.
Okay.
No?
No.
Okay. Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Now
okay.
Go to the next, yes.
Okay, so entering in detail of my presentation, we were all aware of radical change of perspective deriving from the globalization of the state fiscal sovereignty and the tax system. And so in a scenario of economic interdependence among states, tax has become even an instrument to encourage the competitiveness of a country, and at the same time to discourage the harmful tax competition within a new European tax order, in which states set limit on themselves in the exercise of their tax sovereignty, and recognize also the importance of a policy based on mutual tax coordination. And in the light of these premises, my paper aims to draw the attention to the significance of this ongoing transformation of the national tax system of European member states due the tax competition processes. And in this respect, it described the evolution, for example, of personal income tax rate in the European Union till the most recent trend. And actually, as it is well now, the taxpayer mobility has an impact not only on corporate income taxation, but also on personal income taxation, which may be considered as an additional tool to attract tax bases from other countries. And well, in a first stage, many European member states have responded to this increase in mobility by lowering their tax rate. Looking at the evolution of income and wealth tax rate and revenue since 1990s, the European Union experienced a period of a decline in top statutory personal income tax rate, in particular, as you can see in figure 1, from 1995 until the global financial crisis of 2008. And during the course of this long period, the average top statutory rate in European countries fell from nearly 48% to less than 40%. And and the enlargement in 2004 of the European Union and the introduction of a tax system with relatively low rates contribute to the continued fall of the European average top personal income tax rate. However, I have found that downward trend in tax rate had already been visible in European Union 15 countries since the mid of the 1990s, and consequently the reason of this reduction in tax rate is not to be strictly related to the new and more fiscally competitive countries entering in the European Union. But statutory tax rates are not the only instrument governments use to attract income and wealth rich individuals. In my analysis of the development of a national tax system of European member states with specific regard to personal tax competition, I have found that the most striking trend is the increase in the number of personal income tax schemes targeting foreign individuals. And over time, these schemes are becoming very popular, but even increasingly aggressive. And here it's quite interesting to reflect on data. As you can see in figure 2, in 1994, only 5 such schemes were in existence. For example, UK, Irish remittance basis or schemes, or Dutch, Belgian, and Danish regimes. But in 2020, there were 28 of these regimes, and usually the change of tax residence is an element common to all these schemes, which in turn can differ for the requirement and process of election and for the taxpayer who are target for. And there are some tentative rankings suggest that the most harmful one are the Italian and Greek high net worth individual regimes, even Cyprus high income regime, and the pension regime of Cyprus, Greece, and Portugal. And these regimes exhibit a long period of duration, provide significant tax advantage, specifically target very high income individual, or do not require any real economic activity in a given member state. And at present, preferential regime apply to over 200,000 beneficiaries. And in the second part, In the second part of my paper, I also discuss the general trend in corporate income taxation, and again, in a scenario of interdependent and increasing mobility of capital, the competition among different European member states was strongly based on corporate tax rate reduction in order to attract potential investors, but even to compensate the expected or actual losses occurred from the lowering of tax rate by other jurisdiction. And as it shows in figure 3, the average statutory tax rate in the European Union has declined significantly during the past several decades, from approximately 35% in 1995 to nearly 21% in 2021, and in between 2008 and 2021, the rate of the corporate income tax continued to be gradually decreased for the purpose to minimizing the effect of decreases. And the same trend can be recognized also with regard to last recent year, 2021, and in the current year, the 2022, as you can see in figure 6, with the consequence that all the warning on the risk to trigger a race to the bottom are turning out to be realistic. And in the light of this fact and trend, is understandable why during this year the international European political debate on tax competition has focused only on one relevant dimension, namely corporate taxation, by introducing, as we well know, a global minimum tax. However, according to my studies, a more balanced approach also accepts to consider the impact of other factors on location choice, and I call it a two-dimensional analysis. And actually, this bidimensional analysis, supported by some theoretical studies and empirical results, reveal the presence of since the beginning of some differences in this trend between new and old member states within the general downward trend of the corporate tax rate, as you can see in this in figure 5, and suggest that other factors in the form of public inputs for companies can play a crucial role in the allocation choices on top of general rate cuts. And for example, Ernst & Young in 2004, list 18 criterions confirming that corporate tax rate is one of the different factors that explain the attractiveness of country. For example, among others, knowledge, innovation, human capital contribute to competitiveness. And here the analysis, my analysis, highlight even a different role of taxes. Taxes can be used to raise the quantity and quality of public infrastructure, education, and more generally public service, which in turn can raise private capital productivity. Hence, and I conclude, it may be rational for investor to stay in a relatively high tax country if they find compensation in terms of quantity and quality of public use. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Isabella. Thank you very much. Okay. Now, the ladies were first. We have the third presenter, Alexander Kishilevich, who is coming from our neighboring faculty named School of Economics and Business within the University of Ljubljana. He's an associate professor with main topics of interests as macroeconomics, environmental economics, economics of culture, philosophy of science and methodology, institutional economics, and cooperative analysis of economic systems. So quite a lot of interests, Alexander, right? Alexander will present green tax reform from the perspective of experiences of old EU member countries and guidelines for the new ones. Alexander, please join us.
Okay, thanks for a nice introduction. Good afternoon to everyone. Shall we first check if I think my audio connection is okay, that you can hear me properly, yes?
Audio is okay, yes.
Okay, very well. Okay, now I will share the screen. Just a moment. Okay, so the point of today's presentation, I will try to be brief as much as I can, is the experience with the so-called green tax reform in the old member states and what is the policy advice, potential policy advice for new member states. So for those, just a moment. Okay, so basically the green taxes are so-called the market-based instruments. They are trying to demotivate you to pollute the environment. So mainly the countries like Sweden, Germany, Great Britain, Finland, Denmark implemented the so-called green tax reform, and very often this green tax reform is just one part of the side. The other part of the side is so-called environmental budget reform. So it means that you redefine the budget on both sides, on the tax revenue side and on the expenditure side. So what's the idea behind? The idea behind of the green tax reform in general is to change the structure of the tax system in a way, like, for example, the first speaker talked about going from direct to indirect taxes. And this here is an idea is to move away from the, instead of taxing good things like tax on income and tax on capital, that we should increase the tax rates on the so-called bad things. And these bad things are mainly the things which are related to the environment, to the pollution of the environment. So that's the reason why we call this green tax reform. So it should be fiscal neutral. It means that in the budget, you would collect the same amount of funds. However, you will change the structure. The structure would go, you will increase taxes on pollution, on the use of natural resources, for example, transport tax, taxes on pollution and the use of resources, energy taxes are a typical example. And in the amount of money which you will collect, you will reduce the taxes on the so-called good things, like on income, for example, you will reduce income tax or social contribution. So what's the point behind? The point behind, we call it the so-called double dividend. So it means it will have an environmental dividend, positive effect on the environment, because tax will demotivate you to use certain resources. And on the other side, you will have economic dividend because you will be more competitive. Lower labor costs, lower contributions, and income tax will increase competitiveness, so we will be more competitive on the global market. That's the idea behind. So if you look at the data for the countries, I divided the group. In the upper part are the old member states, in the lower part are the new member states. What we can see here, that why I have chosen 1995, because this is the year when majority of the countries, old member state, implemented the so-called green tax reform. As we can see is that if we look, for example, for today, we can see that the share of green taxes have been reduced in the past couple of years. So we can say that decreasing rate of green tax maybe is a sign that project of environmental tax reform is over. So many people or many economies today call for a new environmental tax reform regarding the sustainable development on all the issues which we have in front of us regarding the climate change. In the lower part, we can see that the new member states, that basically the share of green taxes, this is the share of green taxes in GDP, has been increasing in the past couple of years. So of course, this indicator can be misleading, the share of taxes in GDP regarding, you can increase it due to higher taxes or lower GDP because of the crisis. So however partially this can be misleading, but we get a general idea what the trend is. So we have relatively high taxes, or comparative relatively higher taxes in the new member states than in the old member states, and that in a certain way limits the room for intervention. For example, we were calculating what will be the effect if we reduce if you increase the green taxes in Slovenia in the amount of 200 million, which is, and in this amount we reduce taxes on income tax and social contributions. What we found out is that the effect on the GDP is relatively small. Okay, we try different variations. We reduce just the income tax, we reduce social contributions for the employers, we reduce social contributions from the employees. In all these cases, we got very limited effect on the GDP growth. So we can say the double dividend is like a nice idea, but in reality, when we start to calculating it, the data didn't basically confirm this nice idea that we can improve the quality environment and we can, at the same time, we think increase competitiveness of the country, especially from the tax point of view. The other table here shows us the share of green taxes in the total tax revenues and social contributions in percentage points. Here we can see that countries, for example, like, for example, Bulgaria and some new member states are really high on this ranking. And some other countries like Germany and Luxembourg are very low. If we look the effect of this green tax reform, we can see on this table that in every country which basically implemented the green tax reform, we can see that income tax or social contributions were reduced in that period. Here we have an example of Sweden, Netherlands, Germany, Finland, Denmark. UK is not really a good case. And on the other side, in all these countries, basically they increase taxes, the green taxes. Either on energy, either on transport, either on use of different resources. And basically from this point of view, we can say that they accomplished the goal of changing the tax structure. However, the effect can be discutable, can be questionable, especially if we see what kind of effect this has on the GDP. The graph shows us the correlation between total emissions and GDP in countries which basically implemented the green tax reform. As we can see here, that the correlation between emissions and GDP, we have a divergence, which means that decoupling, which means the higher GDP can lead to high energy use. So we can see that from this point of view, that in spite of the fact that GDP was increasing, the total emissions remain at the same level, and basically this is a positive outcome which follows out of it. So what were the main dilemmas which the countries in the all member states have regarding the implementation of the green tax reform? The most important was the question of regressiveness. So whenever you introduce a green tax, the people who have very low income will be hit the most. Because if you want to change the heating system or whatever, it brings huge costs, especially people who live alone, the elderly people who live alone, or single households, or elderly women. These are the, shall we say, segments of the society which will be hit the most. The second objection, which mainly, or shall we say, a second dilemma is how this will affect the competitiveness in the industry sector. So if we increase green taxes on using different kind of energy, it will increase costs for industries. So this is how usually the regressiveness is usually, you solve this problem with so-called ex post transfer to households. And the drop in competitiveness, we usually solve, or majority of countries solve this by either by giving them eco subsidies or reduction of taxes, some kind of tax deductions. So it's better to do it ex post, because if you do it ex ante, people will not change their behavioral pattern. So the point of the green taxes is to change the behavioral pattern. So basically, if you're trying to solve the problem of regressiveness and lack of competitiveness, it's better to do it afterwards. The main problem with the green taxes is they have very limited potential, because if you want, let's assume that you would like to reduce income tax for 1 percentage point. So it's relatively, in a budget, it's relatively a lot of money. Or if you would like to reduce social contributions for 1-2 percentage points. So that would mean that you would have to increase green taxes, because the tax base is relatively small. For relatively substantial, you will have to increase green taxes substantially. So there is, at certain point, a very limited potential what you can do in the tax structure regarding the green taxes. So couple of basically advices or basically policy recommendations for the countries which still would go in line and implement the green tax reform. Undoubtedly, the question of regressiveness and the question of competitiveness should be in the center of focus of every policymaker. Also, I started this discussion with the so-called double dividend, but double dividend is not present just in the public sector, but also in the private sector. So how to basically increase the attractiveness for the private sector as well to be engaged in this kind of so-called green investments. Then we have gradualness and predictability. All the countries which implemented the green tax reform did that very slowly, gradually, and predictably. So the industry sector has time to adapt to changes, and this predictability is of key essential and very important. Wide public support. All the countries have very strong support from the public. It's very politically easy to sell the green tax reform on the market because you will tax the bad things and you will reduce taxes on the good things. So basically you have very often wide support by the public. If you, for example, if you will accomplish the so-called fiscal neutrality. Fiscal neutrality means that overall fiscal burden will not increase. Okay, I will stop here. I hope I was clear enough. If my colleagues have any questions, I'm here to answer. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Alexander. This is almost close to our next meetings theme, where we will also discuss green topics. So you are covering both fields already. So thank you very much for a nice presentation. Our next guest is Sabina Hodžić from Croatia. Sabina, welcome. You are coming from Department of Public Finance from Faculty of Tourism and Hospitality Management at University of Rijeka. Sabina is Associate Professor in Public Finance, International Taxation, Digital Economy, and Local and Regional Government. She's also currently working as a project manager of Horizon Europe project. So Sabina's presentation will cover tax competitiveness in the EU, especially focusing on case of Croatia. She will describe the existing situation of tax policy and tax competitiveness and challenges, opportunities for tax policy in Croatia. And the basic idea behind is to present the solutions to introduce a more socially just and functional tax collection system. So Sabina, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nina. Good afternoon to everyone. I'm very happy to be with you today, and I want to thank the organizers for organizing this event with interesting topic, and I hope that in the future there will be more topics to discuss. Let me just share my screen. One moment. Okay. Okay, do you see my presentation?
Yes, put it on full screen, please.
Yes.
Yes,
now.
great. Yes, great.
So as Nina already said, the topic of my presentation is the tax competitiveness with the focus from and with the objective from Croatia. The outline of this presentation is first to present the key features of Croatian tax system, then what tax reforms carried out in Croatia, what are the taxation trends in Croatia, as well as the current state of the tax competitiveness. And at the end, I will conclude and provide further steps or recommendation to improve the tax competitiveness in Croatia. The Croatian tax system was characterized by constant and dynamic changes, which ultimately resulted in a complex and incomprehensible tax system for both taxpayer and tax administration employees. Therefore, from 2000 to 2018, the Croatian tax system has undergone numerous tax reforms in order to achieve greater tax competitiveness. In the period from 2012 to 2015, 44 changes were made to tax regulation in the tax system, and the most significant year was 2017, when 8 tax laws were amended due to the high tax burden. Therefore, the aim of the study is to present and describe the current state of tax policy, tax competitiveness and challenges, and also opportunities for tax policy in Croatia. We all know that in every country in the world, taxes are the most important and generous government revenue. The tax system of Croatia is based on 3 main levels. The first one is the central or state taxes, then we have the regional and the local taxes, and the third one is the neutral between the central and the regional and local government. The tax system of the Republic of Croatia is a plural and young tax system, which has extended only since the independence of the country. And from the table 1, we can see the structure of the tax forms in Croatia. So in the group of the state taxes are like the main taxes, like the corporate income tax, the value-added tax, and the excise duties, and also some special taxes, like special taxes on motor vehicles, on coffee and non-alcoholic beverages, and so on. The county taxes, which belongs to the group of the regional government, are the inheritance and gift tax, tax on road motor vehicles, on vessels, and levy on coin-operated machines for amusement. City or municipal taxes are consisted of the surtax on income tax, consumption tax, tax on holiday houses, on the use of public surface, and the real estate transfer tax, where the common tax is income tax, which is divided between the level of the state taxes, state government, and also local. The main tax reforms were carried out in 3 most important taxes. This is the personal income tax, or just income tax, the corporate income tax, and the value-added tax. In the Republic of Croatia, a completely new system of income taxation was introduced in 1994. Under this new system, as a result of the tax reform, the part of income intended for consumption is taxed, and the parts of income obtained through savings, investment, dividends, interest, and other capital were excluded from taxation. The development of income tax in the Republic of Croatia took place in 3 periods. So you can see here from slides from 1994 to 2000, 2001, 2004 as a second period, and the third period, 2005, 2010. And in the third period, efforts are being made to simplify the income taxation system and to adopt tax rules that are transparent and understandable for taxpayers. Finally, after 2017, a new income tax law was introduced with the aim of reducing tax rates and broadening tax base. Regarding the corporate income tax in 1994, the law on corporate income tax came into force, where with this act, for the first time in Croatia, the system of corporate income tax was regulated separately. Regarding the VAT was introduced into the tax system in 1998, and due to the tax reforms, only changes in the tax rates were implemented. In Croatia, the most important tax reform was due to the membership in the European Union was carried out in order to create a more competitive tax system. From this slide, from this table too, you can see the trends in the tax structure by the type of the tax. And according to the traditional classification of taxes, direct and indirect taxes, the most important indirect taxes is VAT, where the VAT is in every member state is consisting of the highest level or ratio of government revenue. And from here, we can conclude that there is a slight decrease in total tax revenue. Of course, this is data for till 2019. Later on, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we also noticed a decrease in the tax revenue, which is caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. From the data in figure 1, you can see here the revenue structure by level of government as percentage of total taxation. From here, we can conclude that the majority of tax revenues in Croatia from 2010 to 2019 were collected by the central or state government. The share is around 56% on average, which can be explained by the fact that the indicator of tax autonomy of local governments in Croatia is very low, and therefore all decisions on the introduction of new forms of taxation, tax rates, tax bases, and tax collection are taken by the central government. Of course, in order to increase the tax competitiveness, this should be for sure improved and also changed. Although the tax policy largely depends on the functioning of the state, the level of state efficiency is very important. Therefore, the data show interesting results for Croatia. For example, you can see here that the value for public finances is 3.86. This is for the data of 2021, and the rank is 39, which means that they are managed efficiently. The value for tax evasion is 2.84. This is also data for 2021. The rank is 54, which also shows that the tax evasion is not a threat to the economy. In tax policy, the tax collection indicators, specifically income tax, corporate income tax, and capital and wealth tax, is scored as follows. Income tax 26, this is data for 2019. The corporate income tax 19, also for 2019, and the capital and wealth tax 31, also for 2019. From the figure 2, you can see the overall performance for Croatia, and the overall performance is measured by economic performance, business efficiency, government efficiency, and infrastructure. And from the data in figure 2, it can be concluded that the overall performance rank decreased after 2021, which can be attributed to the COVID-19 pandemic. And for each observed year, the highest score is recorded in business efficiency, 62 for the year 2018 and 63 for the year 2019 and 2020. And also the lowest level is recorded in infrastructure and economic performance. With the accession of the Republic of Croatia to the European Union in 2013, one of the most significant and largest reforms of the Croatian tax system took place. It was mandatory to harmonize Croatian tax rules with the legislation of the European Union. Therefore, it is expected that with higher tax competitiveness, Croatia will become more attractive for foreign investors. Looking at the current situation of the Croatian economic system, the economy is characterized by significant disturbances in macroeconomic indicators. Therefore, it is not suitable for strengthening competitiveness and promoting entrepreneurship and productivity. Therefore, it is necessary to reduce the tax burden on entrepreneurs in order to strengthen the economy and competitiveness, to introduce a more social, just, and functional tax collection system, and to support for entrepreneurial activities based on the Sustainable Development Goals, like poverty reduction, green economy, access to education for all. And also one of the important aspects is also digitalization of the public administration and also the regional and local government. So thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you, Sabina. Our next presenter is my colleague Dejan Raušal, who will, similarly as Sabina did for Croatia, present the situation in Slovenia. He is coming from our Faculty of Public Administration and representing also Zavod 14. He's working as a researcher and assistant professor in areas covering e-government, taxation, and e-learning. So they analyzed the competitiveness of tax system in Slovenia compared to EU and OECD countries, and he found out that our system is quite outdated, and there are many possibilities for improvements in order to support the development of economy of Slovenia in the right way. So Dejan, please join us.
Okay. Thank you, Nina, for the introduction. So, yeah, as Nina mentioned earlier, I'm going to present you tax competitiveness in the European Union, especially from the perspective of Slovenia. And before I start, let's say, with more detailed presentation, let me just briefly emphasize some introductory remarks on which this topic and chapter was based. So, of course, we all know that taxation is a very important element for contemporary economy because it represents a fundamental source for founding public expenditures. However, recent globalization and especially digital transformation trends reveal that there are some shortcomings of the existing tax system. Tax systems are often not aligned with, let's say, recent advances of digital, so-called digital economy. And this, of course, significantly affects the overall tax competitiveness in the European Union countries, including Slovenia. So therefore, I think it's crucial to modernize tax systems and policies by eliminating some ineffective selected taxation practices, which may accelerate, at the end of the day, economic development and growth. And the main aim of this presentation is actually to show and present tax competitiveness and some challenges and opportunities related to tax policy in Slovenia, and present their comparison with the situation with EU and OECD countries. So on the next slide, I'm showing you tax competitiveness score, or more specifically rankings of the European OECD countries. But before we look at those indexes or rankings, let me just briefly explain the definition of tax competitiveness, which is considered by this international institution. So Tax Foundation, who is preparing this report. So Tax Foundation defines tax competitiveness as the ability of a tax system to promote competitiveness and neutrality of taxation. And what does these two terms mean? First, a competitive tax code is actually the one that keeps marginal tax rates low. And on the other hand, a neutral tax code is one that seeks to raise the most revenue with the fewest economic distortions. And if we look at this map, we can see that Baltic countries, Baltic states, has actually the most competitive tax systems. These are especially Estonia and Latvia, if you see these blue countries. On the other hand, we have identified that Mediterranean countries have obviously the least competitive tax system. So especially France, you can see Italy, Portugal, and also Spain. However, since I'm presenting here the case of Slovenia, if we look at Slovenian ranking, we can see that we are actually on 20. We are ranked on the 23rd place. However, if we put all these countries together, we can see that Slovenia is lagging behind several countries. So Slovenia is lagging behind Scandinavian, Balkan, Western, and even some Central European Eastern countries, which we found, let's say, problematic for Slovenia. So the next slide is presents the tax revenue structure in Slovenia and in European Union. And we can actually see, maybe first we look at the figures. Let me just briefly explain that the first three taxes, so corporate income, personal income, and social security taxes, are according to OECD research considered as taxes which are more harmful to economic growth. On the other hand, the last three taxes, such as taxes on immovable property, consumption taxes, and environmental taxes, are considered to be less harmful for the economic growth. However, if we look at this figure where the comparison between Slovenia and the EU is presented, we can see that Slovenia has lower tax revenues from corporate income taxes, personal income taxes, and immovable property taxes. And contrary, we can see that Slovenia has higher tax revenues from social security contributions, consumption taxes, and environmental taxes. And what can be, let's say, the main emphasis from this slide? It can be that we can actually see that in Slovenia, there is a large tax burden on labor, and therefore is often suggested by our policymakers to rebalance the tax mix in Slovenia away from labor taxes and maybe to focus more on consumption taxes. Then on the next slide, I'm showing you tax rates in the European Union countries. So here are presented the tax rates for 27 European Union countries. Here I have highlighted the Slovenia. And what are the findings? So if you compare Slovenia with let's say the average values of other countries, we can actually see that in Slovenia, value-added tax is actually very comparable to the European Union and OECD average. However, this is not the case for personal income tax rate, for which we can see it's significantly higher in comparison to the European Union or OECD countries average. And then if we look at the corporate income tax rates, we can see that, yeah, they are somehow, these rates are somehow comparable. However, Slovenian tax rate is maybe a little bit slower than the European Union or OECD average. And yeah, on this slide, I actually examined in my paper also the role of tax administration in tax competitiveness. And I actually found out that tax administration also play a very important role in taxation procedure. So not only tax rates, but I believe that also tax administration. So the way how taxes are collected is also very important. However, the recent global survey from the World Bank actually found out that taxpayers still perceive tax rates and, of course, tax administration as the most problematic barriers for their operations. And this figure is showing what are the main problems. And we can see that most taxpayers in Central and Eastern European countries need assistance for interpretation of the law, so almost about 80%. Then they emphasized also that they need help in filling and submitting tax returns, but they need less help in tax refunds and interpretation of the law in the accounting field. And based on, let's say, this presentation, I came to some important findings for Slovenia. So we saw that tax competitiveness, in terms of tax competitiveness, Slovenia is lagging behind some countries, especially Scandinavian and Baltic countries, of course. Then we also saw that tax policy in Slovenia which we found very problematic, and this is probably one opportunity how we can improve tax system in Slovenia. So to move away from labor taxation. Then we also saw that, or found out in this chapter, that there are increased globalization and digitalization trends which are complicating our tax system. And of course, we found out that the tax system in Slovenia is outdated and complex, especially because of digitalization and globalization trends. And at the final slide, I listed, let's say here briefly, some policy recommendations for Slovenia. This is, of course, first one, to redesign a tax system, then to maintain stimulating economic development. As I mentioned earlier, it is also suggested to rebalance the tax mix away from labor taxes. Then it's suggested to modernize the tax system, and of course to further improve effectiveness and efficiency of tax administration. And I believe that all these recommendations for Slovenia may improve tax policy in the future. So thank you very much for attention.
Okay, thank you. Then we have three more presentations. So the next one is Fabio Astartelarico, coming from Italy, working at Faculty of Social Sciences in Ljubljana as assistant researcher. And his interests lie mainly in the areas of political economy of taxation and econometrics, as well as statistical programming. So although coming from Italy or being Italian, he's focusing specifically on Bulgaria and other Southeastern European countries. So also in his paper, he will present the guidelines for rethinking tax competitiveness in Bulgaria. Okay, Fabio, welcome.
Good evening to everyone. I hope you can hear me well.
Yes, well, we will wait for a presentation also.
Can you see it?
It's uploading. Yes, great.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So as the very kind introduction said, I will be focusing on the case of Bulgaria. I structured my presentation more or less like the paper. So I will first introduce you to the case of Bulgaria. We will discuss why Bulgaria has a problem with tax competitiveness, outline the main guidelines for a new approach, and then I will just invite you to ask any question in case there should be any. As also other speakers have said before, there is a bit of a debate regarding the existence of a gap in between how taxation is applied in all the new member states. Here I define basically new member states simply as those that joined after 2004, and I include Cyprus. Sometimes it's excluded. In this case, we can see that basically between 2008 and 2020, there has been no notable tendency to diminishing the gap in the average corporate tax rate between these two groups of countries. It has shrunk by just 0.8% in the last 15 years. And they are both tendentially decreasing, but very slightly. And why does Bulgaria matter? Well, it matters because also I was noticing in some slides of my colleagues that sometimes Bulgaria was missing together with Romania. But I guess it happens because it's a small country. Not many people look at this kind of countries because they are also not so influential in policy making at the wider continental level. But in my opinion, it shows clearly that this idea that there is some kind of fair tax competition and an harmful tax competition, that if you get it right, you will attract more foreign capital and grow faster, is not necessarily true. Because as also Professor Aristovnik was mentioning in the beginning, there are other factors that probably are much more important, and taxation can actually help in improving other aspects of a country's functioning. The main problem that Bulgaria has with this tax system is that on the one hand, it plays heavily on the low statutory rates, but actually the system is very complex. There are exceptions for basically every impossible imaginable type of company. Even there is one special tax regime for gambling company, another special tax regime for navigation company, and it could go on for a couple of hours indeed. And then Bulgaria lowered these corporate tax rates to 10% statutory, 9% effective since 2006. And yet, basically since 2008, both FDIs and internal investment have consistently decreased, and decreased more and faster than in any other new member states. As we can see in this slide, Bulgaria is the red line. Basically, it flattens, it collapses after 2008, 2009. And whereas other countries have similar trajectories, but then they recover a positive trend, this doesn't happen in Bulgaria. It is basically the only, both EU and some non-EU countries that witnesses and experiences this stall. Moreover, this period of application of a low and flat corporate tax regime has seen worsening GDP dynamic. Basically, Bulgaria was growing at a rate over average of 5% per year until 2008. After 2008, as other countries, the growth rate reduces, but then in most other Eastern European countries and new member states, this growth rate somewhat recovers, at least after 2012, 2013. Instead, this doesn't happen in Bulgaria. And that's why basically some economists started saying that proportional taxation, flat taxation, has a negative impact on growth. Moreover, many have spoken of the Laffer curve, so this famous idea that you reduce tax rates, but you broaden the base, and then somehow there is an incentivizing effect for which revenues should grow. It doesn't happen either. Growth have followed basically GDP growth during positive periods, and during contraction and recession, they've fallen more than proportionally. So at this point, I would like to introduce what I think would be a new possible approach to tax competitiveness and taxation in Bulgaria. And in order to do so, I somewhat go into the topic of our conversation, which is the comparison between new and old member states. And essentially, if we look at this chart, I plotted the change in the average effective corporate income tax rate between 2008 and 2020 for all 27 EU member states. We can see that in some highly developed and wealthy and not so unequal country, like for instance Belgium, actually the average effective corporate tax rate has increased in the last years. The same thing has happened in some countries that had to deal with the financial crisis, such as Cyprus, Lithuania, Latvia, which, by the way, Lithuania and Latvia are amongst the countries that are most tax competitive. So it's not everything about tax rates we can see here. And more importantly, the very rich countries, like for instance, France, Italy, in part also Germany, they always speak about reducing tax rates, about doing some tax competition, but it's arguable whether in the end they actually do it. For instance, in Italy, we know that actually it ended up the other way around. We have been speaking for like 20 years, probably more than I can remember, about reducing tax rates. They keep increasing basically every year, or at least the tax burden. So I suggest that maybe it's adequate to separate these two conversations, these two points of analysis, the mere focus on the structure of the tax revenues and how the rates are decided by the lawmaker, and instead focusing on the other aspects that holistically contribute to a country's competitiveness in a globalizing economy. And that's why my general guidelines are rationalizing the corporate tax system, so abolishing all these various sector-specific regimes that currently exist, so that like we have a level playing field that is fair for all the participants, and especially abolishing all the various exceptions and other kind of loopholes that many foreign companies use to basically do nothing else than base erosion and profit shifting in Bulgaria. And then introduce a progressive corporate income tax, which for some can see a bit not compatible with the idea of tax competitiveness, but for instance, a country like Slovakia just did it. Its actual ranking didn't get much worse in the last years, and it has produced a very big increase in tax revenues and has brought Slovakia amongst the countries with the highest rate for that size of country without an enormous impact on GDP. However, this topic still hasn't been studied extensively. And then with the revenues that come from this increase in tax revenues on corporate taxation to be reinvested in sectors that are key to make Bulgaria more attractive and to restart the country's economic engine, such as education, especially a raise in teacher salaries, which are currently the lowest in the EU, and this has a demotivating effect. Infrastructure, all the aspects, both physical and in terms of informatic infrastructure, which, by the way, should not be left though to political decision makers, because this can lead to corruption and maladministration, and instead appoint a special independent agency that could manage this kind of investment. Research and development and high-tech exports, which have also been mentioned by some speakers before me, in which Bulgaria is dramatically lagging behind the other countries of the region, but for which there is an underlying ecosystem of private actors and a history of economic and social development that could really give this country a head start in comparison to neighboring and comparable countries. So this was my short summary of the research. Obviously, in the chapter, in the paper, there is much more to be discussed. And in general, I've touched all the points I wanted to make, and only maybe how I would define this approach to tax competitiveness. It's bang for the buck. So every dollar, every euro, every leva that is paid in tax by corporate taxpayers should be worth it. And this worthiness is acquired by actually investing the money that is gathered from companies into some public spending items that are really growth enhancing and not just sitting there or acquiring political capital. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fabio Ashtar. So we are going next to Bulgaria, to North Macedonia now. Our colleague Kristina Misheva will present the situation there. She's coming from Faculty of Law at Zedelchev University in Štip, and she's professor in financial law, company law, and e-health law. So for the last 2 years, she has also been an academic project coordinator for one Jean Monnet project. And Kristina will present the opportunities and challenges for tax policy in North Macedonia, which is one of the EU candidate countries. So let's go. Kristina, please, you will present your topics. Also, tell us when to move the slides.
Yes, thank you, Nina. Sorry.
No problem. Just...
sorry for this inconvenience. I think that my internet is a little bit
okay, we will manage, no worries. No
okay
worries.
I don't have so much slides, and I think that I will be in that 10 minutes and maybe less.
Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kristina, as Nina said. It's nice to be part of this workshop and presentations. And I'm glad that I was able to hear some news and to be updated for the latest impact that all financial systems has, not only in the region, but on the global level. I will just introduce, I have a little bit of different presentation, so it's not much of tables, but it's more theoretical approach. Of course, with a background of facts and using by some reports and the fiscal strategies, and also the data that Public Revenue Office is sharing with us. So my focus is most of the investment in the developing transition countries, or why should we invest? And maybe I emphasize this because our country lately is focused on how to attract the investments, because the economic situation and the economic growth seems to be a little bit on a stage where it's on a standby stage, let's say. Therefore, we may say that all the countries are following, or the investors are following some kind of determinates if when they want to invest in some of the countries. And we may say that our countries, the transition countries, have been lately, or let's say for Macedonia, for the last 3 decades, has been part of a large investments, direct foreign investments, and also investments nowadays from some of the domestic companies. The geographic position of the countries and the demographics also is one of the main are one of the main determinants, and maybe this is the first stage when someone wants to invest. And you already know where is the position of our country. I think that we are all from Europe here. And about the demographics, we may say that I have mentioned here that when someone invests, they are looking up the capacity of the human resources, which may say that we are already dealing. We can afford this, or we are good capacity. We have a good capacity of human resources. But the main situation, or maybe the negative position or cons, is the aging of population. This is something that is faced, that are faced most of the countries, and also not only the European countries, but in general Europe, and I think the globe as well. So if the country's population be taken into account, then the public sector in Macedonia, in North Macedonia, employs 88.2% per each 1,000 inhabitants, and this is being slightly higher than the average in the Western Balkan countries, accounting for 82.2 persons in 2020. So number of the employees per 1,000 inhabitants is the highest in Serbia and Bosnia and Herzegovina, exceeding 100%. So being the lowest in Kosovo and Albania, ranging between 55 and 65 persons. And the number of employees in the public sector in relation to the population of the analyzed countries being EU member states. For example, this is Croatia and Slovenia. I gave this as an example because I saw that there is also a speaker from Croatia. They are slightly higher, and they are accounting for 124.8 and 1,044.1 persons respectively. So we may say our agency has calculated that in 2030, sorry, in the 2050, that the working person, it will be the percentage will be 1 worker on 5 pensioners, or 5 persons that are already retired. And this is something that will burden additionally the budget. The promotion is something that most of the countries in the marketing that they're doing for the countries is that they need, or they are, it's a kind of determinate that makes the country, and our country is making that through a special agency that are established for the last years, and they have a lot of campaigns. Are these questions for me, or there are something else? Should I read this, Anina, or should I continue?
You can continue.
Okay.
Yes.
Then what else is that attracts the economic stimulus packages that the government is affording for the foreign investments, and also one-stop shop registration in the trade register. We may say that North Macedonia, you can register a company in 1 day, and this is connected with this electronic register, e-trade register that we already have, and it's very easy to register a company in our country. The fiscal incentives are also determinate and lower zero tax rates that we will see examples in our country, as well as the custom reliefs. The tax system in our country consists of several tax reforms and different types of taxes. So during the last 3 decades, the tax reforms were the main focus of the country, especially with adapting the programs of the World Bank and International Monetary Fund. That's how the tax system in the country has been reformed for several reasons, by following the OECD and the EU recommendations to ensure the indirect and direct investments and trade, to build a mechanism for legal and natural persons to invest and spend in their own country, and also to develop the national capital market. Therefore, this is the main, for the next slide, we need to see the overarching priorities for developing tax competition in the small economies. And maybe the focus we can give to the tax autonomy, but mostly the tax autonomy is given on the property taxes. And we can in the countries where we have a situation like unitary countries, as our country is, as an example, most of the Nordic countries are. But the difference is that the Nordic countries has a long-standing tradition of let's say, great strong taxing powers, and we cannot compare our country with that. But usually our governments want to compare our country with some of the Nordic countries, especially with Sweden. Let's say that. But we need to. We just need to underline that we have the potential to complete tax policy and also to have this tax autonomy. Additionally, the government needs there is a lack of strategic interaction among the tax policy in the regions, but also on the country level. This is the same. So our country mostly follows the strategic that are brought in the region, and also what the EU recommends, but mostly they don't follow inside the strategic that they have already adopted. So this is some kind of interaction that maybe should be followed and should be seen as a flaw. What are also one of the priorities to develop or to develop the competition is also the ability of the country to shift the tax base, and maybe this is the let's say the core determinant why someone is investing, or someone is why the tax competition is on a higher level of one or to another country. The free trade agreements and the bilateral and multilateral trade and tax agreements are also legal base, where most of the investors are seizing to see or they want or they plan to invest. The North Macedonia, next slide please. The North Macedonia tax system has been reformed several times, as I mentioned. So maybe the main the next slide, please. So the next slide, please. Okay, the flats. This is something that we need to see that in general, design the fiscal infrastructure is a matter of our national policymakers. So our recognition is according to the flat taxation, and maybe this is one of the The flat taxation is something that we are practicing for the last few years, and it's going to be changed. It has been changed in the law on personal tax, but have been postponed several times. The flat taxation for the personal and for corporate taxes will be for now until 2023 will be as was earlier or before adopting the new law in 2008. Another mechanism for the tax competition is the free technology industrial zones or the free trade zones. And this is very famous in our country. We have several trade zones, and this is elaborated in the text or in the paper. Most over also the fiscal incentive, the tax exemptions for non-taxation of reinvested profits that some of the companies has, also the payroll taxes, because we see the payroll taxes are something that we usually or tax holidays are a common form of tax incentives used by transitional countries. So having back on these all points, we may say that the main tax reform in our country was the flat tax in 2016, and consequently the progressive taxation was repealed, and flat taxation has been implemented with one reduced tax rate for 20% in 2007 and 10% in 2008. Before this reform, the tax rates for personal income for natural persons were 15%, 18%, and 25%, or a tax rate of 50% for profit income or the legal persons and the corporations. We cannot speak about the big corporations, but here we may say for companies, let's say. In this way, the tax burden for the taxpayers was reduced for the first time and listed the country as one of the countries that with the lowest tax rate in Europe. Having in mind this, we may say that, and just have the time, I need to cut all this, that I want to say it and to elaborate, but I just want to mention that the corporate income tax is 10% and it's the same as the personal income tax, but the average corporate tax rate among EU 27 countries is 21.30%, and among OECD countries is 23.05%, and that's why I need to emphasize this, that we have a very low corporate income tax. Following the direct taxation, the EU directive and the condition of the national economy, the general VA8 rate is 80%, and there is a reduced rate in 5%. There is a new tax reform. It's a not tax reform. It's more a measure that the government imposed during the COVID. So I wanted to protect the domestic companies. They introduced the VA at 10% just for the domestic company, and just to make some kind of a release for the strike that they have from the health crisis. So the EU's average standard VAT value-added tax is rate on 21%, according to the list of these rates applied in the EU member countries. North Macedonia has the same value-added tax rate as Malta, and Luxembourg has the lowest one. It's with 70%, and Croatia, Denmark, and Sweden they have rates of 25%. The free economical zones have become a mainstream strategic measures, and that's why they are mentioned here. So we may say that I will just there are a lot of tax and non-tax incentives in this for these zones, but I won't spend time on this. I will just mention that in 2021, they generate approximately 3 billion euro of exports, which is equal for 47% of North Macedonia exports. and the export grew by 50% in comparison to 2019 and 22% compared to in 2019. So the average net salary was 490 euros per month, and this is how they are making. And this is how this is calculated, and this is compared according to the average payment that the workers are having in our country or from the domestic for the domestic companies.
Christina,
yes.
Are we coming to the end slowly?
Yes, I need, because I will just go to the recommendation, because I just start speaking. I was thinking that I will be here.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sorry. For the next slide, or for the final slide that already Dejan mentioned, that the tax system should follow the functions. So the fiscal consolidation is a process of aligning the public revenue and expenditure by reducing the expenditure and increasing the revenues for the purpose of reducing the budget deficit and the public debt. So I just I will share just that in the period 2015 and 20, the total general government expenditure in our country is a percentage of GDP accounted for 32.5% of average, being below the average of the Western Balkan countries, which was 37.9%. And lower in 2000, and just I need to see the in 2000, the budget deficit in 2020 reached the level of 8.1% of GDP, while government debt surged to 51.2% of the GDP, with public debt accounting to 60.2% of the GDP, and this is higher that the government was measured during the creating the fiscal strategies. And also you can read the recommendations that are here. They're mostly in the paper, and also I have find it and put in the key findings and the policy recommendation in the report that I have already sent to you. Thank you, and sorry for extending this presentation.
Okay, Christina, thank you very much. And we are welcoming our last presenter, Mr. Konrad Sobanski, coming from Poland. He's researcher and assistant professor at International Finance Department in Poznan University of Economics and Business. He will present the last paper focusing on Poland, also presenting already some new insights in what will COVID pandemic and the war in Ukraine mean for tax legislation in Poland and probably elsewhere in Europe. So, colleague Konrad, you're welcome. Okay, we can see your slides. Can you hear me?
Sorry, I muted just. Okay, can you see the presentation?
Yes, thank you. You can go on.
Thanks. So my presentation is on the tax reform that was implemented in Poland in 2022. The agenda for this, I hope, short presentation is, first I would like to show you some selected country data for taxation trends in Poland. Then I will discuss the reform itself, the current state of the tax policy in Poland, concentrating on the so-called the Polish deal reform. I will present some challenges which are around the tax reform, around the Polish deal. And finally, I will conclude with some policy recommendations for policymakers in Poland. So let me start briefly with some key country data for taxation trends in Poland. Poland belongs in general to EU countries with rather low ratio of revenue to GDP. The ratio is around 40% for Poland as compared to 46% as the average for the European Union countries, or even higher for the European Monetary Union countries, for the Eurozone of 47.3%. It's also quite different from the average European Union picture. When it comes to the significance of direct taxes, they are relatively, the significance is relatively low, only around 20% of total tax revenue. That's the direct taxes revenue. And the remaining elements, close to 40%, these are social contributions, and 40% indirect taxes. Among the direct taxes, the personal income tax, PIT, more or less constitutes around 2/3, and 1/3 that relates to corporate income tax and other taxes. When it comes to the effective taxation, the effective average tax burden in Poland as compared to the European Union, we see also some differences here. The implicit tax rate, which is the effective average tax burden on consumption in Poland, is higher, visibly higher. In Poland, it's 19%, but these are the data for 2020, as compared with 17.1% as the average for the European Union. But on the other hand, the implicit tax rate, the effective taxation on labor, is much visibly lower for Poland than in the European Union. In Poland, it's close to 34%. The tax burden is close to 34%, as compared to the burden, which is more or less higher by 4 percentage points for the European Union. During the current economic crisis that was initiated by the COVID-19 pandemic, the Polish government, the Polish policymakers decided to overhaul the tax legislation and implemented a reform that is called the Polish Deal. The title of this reform, the name for this reform, the Polish Deal, that refers to the New Deal introduced by the US President Franklin Delano Roosevelt during the Great Depression in the 30s. In general, when it comes to aims, under the new tax regulations, the tax system is more progressive, eliminates areas of tax evasion, and aims at lowering the burden on lower tax income payers. The Polish government claims that the effect of the reform is approximately $18 billion per annum. That's an annual amount. So that will be the tax effect, the inflow, the positive effect on Poles. And when you measure that in total until 2030, the government claims that the savings on the side of citizens should amount to $160 billion. And the government claims that around 80 million Poles, especially those with lower incomes, should benefit from paying less personal income tax under the new tax regulations. What's interesting, the bill was passed at the end of October 2021 and came into effect very soon. Afterwards, it came into effect on 1st January 2022. But surprisingly, because of some problems with its implementation, the government needed to implement also some amendments to the general deal for the Polish deal that came into effect from 1st July 2022. And these additional amendments, they constitute another burden for the budget of 7 billion zlotys. That's the estimate for that year. And 24 billion zlotys, this is the estimate, this is the cost of these amendments for the next year, for 2023. The main elements of the Polish deal, of the new regulations in the area for personal income taxation include, first of all, the changes that should increase the revenue, the income on the citizen side, and at the same time reduce tax inflows, PIT tax inflows for the government. So you can first of all say that the government decided to increase the PIT free amount, the PIT allowance, to 30,000 Polish zlotys. And now, after that amendment, it's much closer to the threshold which is observed in the old European Union countries. At the same time, the government decided to increase the threshold for the first PIT income bracket in Poland. Previously, it was 85,000 Polish zlotys, and since the beginning of the year, it's 120,000 Polish zlotys. So now we have the two brackets for PIT taxation. The first is actually taxed no longer with 17%. That rate was decreased starting from 1st July this year to 12%. This is the first bracket. And the upper bracket for PIT taxation is taxed with a 32% tax rate. The government decided also to free pensions received by elderly people up to 2,500 Polish zlotys, and now they are tax exempt. They also decided to introduce some reliefs for working seniors. That's a PIT exemption of some selected income of citizens who have reached retirement age, but at the same time, they decided to continue their professional life, professional employment. What else? Under the PIT regulations, we see also quite crucial changes for families, for larger families. There is a policy being implemented, which is called zero PIT policy for large families, large meaning families with at least 4 children, providing the income, the annual income of such a family is below 85,000 Polish zlotys per annum. And the government also introduced some child benefits, new child benefits for parents of younger children aged up to 3 years. And they amount in total over the 3-year period to 12,000 Polish zlotys. The modifications, they relate in tax legislation, they relate also to the other areas such as the CIT, and under the corporate income taxation, we should especially indicate and take into account some, let's say, improvements for corporations, such as the modification of the distributed profit tax, so-called Estonian tax. The tax rate for the distributed profit tax was decreased for larger companies to 20%, and for smaller companies even to 10%. And we see also under the Polish deal some new tax reliefs, especially those connected with investments in research and development. So, for example, the companies can benefit from so-called robotization relief, or relief for employment of innovative employees that conduct research and development activities. And there is also so-called business expansion relief being implemented for giving some reliefs of up to 190,000 Polish zlotys per annum for promotional activities spendings. On the other hand, we see a new tax that was implemented, that so-called minimum corporate income tax, with a 10% tax rate, and this is imposed for companies that show no profits, that incur losses, or have profitability of less than 1%. So now, under the minimum CIT, even companies showing losses would need to pay some CIT taxation. The Polish deal reforms, they pose a serious challenge for the public finances, for public finance sustainability in Poland, especially if you take into account that they are implemented at a time of economic crisis that was first initiated by the COVID-19 pandemic and then exacerbated by the war in Ukraine. The reform leads in general to narrowing of the tax base. So that's the reduction of tax revenues for the government. But it's going on, it's happening, it's occurring in times of, as I mentioned, unprecedented deterioration of macro environments, and especially unprecedented deterioration of the fiscal stance. If you take into account the major statistics for public finances, such as the gross domestic debt or public budget deficit, you will see deterioration that was first caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. So, for example, the gross domestic debt increased by close to 12 percentage points, measured as a ratio to GDP, from 45% in 2019, so that was the pre-pandemic level, to close to 60% in 2020. When it comes to the public budget deficit, we saw a record high deficit of slightly over 7% in the first year of the pandemic, as compared to less than 1% in the pre-pandemic year of 2019. Currently, it's not that bad. It's 2.5%. That's the last data for 2021. But under the Polish deal, as I mentioned, the expected narrowing of the tax base should lead to further reduction in tax income and at the same time increase in the public budget deficit. We have also other macroeconomic issues that impact on the smooth implementation of the Polish deal reform. such as very high and rising inflation. The recent data for inflation rate for Poland in October 2022, this is close to 18%. So it's another record high inflation rate if you look at the last 2 decades in Poland. And we have, of course, when inflation is increasing, the reference interest rates in general, they are also increasing. And the reference interest rate was increased by the National Bank of Poland from a very low level of 0.1% in September 2021. So not that long time ago, to close to 7% recently in October 2022. So when you compare the inflation, very high inflation, close to 18%, with still much lower interest rates for the Polish zloty, you will notice the negative interest rates on the Polish zloty. And this mix of depreciation of domestic currency, because of the inflation, we see weakening of the Polish zloty, with this increase in interest rates might, of course, further increase the budget deficit. And it could have a very negative, very unfavorable effect on the public finances, on the sustainability of public finances via the debt servicing cost channel. So increasing interest rates, that will increase. We see that already, an increase in budget spending on servicing cost on debt, and a further increase in budget deficit. When it comes to the growth rate, it's expected to slow down in this year to 3.7%, and even more significantly in the coming years. So when you compare with 5% growth in the pre-pandemic years, you will see a deterioration, although still not that huge deterioration, but in the coming years, it might go down much further. So when you think about policy recommendations currently for Polish policymakers, you could mention 3 elements. First of all, looking at the implementation policy of the Polish deal, you should recommend that future reforms of the tax legislation should be much more carefully consulted with taxpayers and much more carefully planned. Let me just indicate that the Polish deal, so in general, very huge amendment to the tax regulations. We say that the Polish deal, that's the largest tax reform in the last 3 decades in Poland. They were implemented over a very short period of time, actually over the 2-month period. And they were implemented in 2002, in January 2002. But it was made public, the draft of the new legislation that was made public no earlier than in May 2021. So because of that, we had a huge confusion in January, so in the first month of implementation. And as a result, the government needed to amend the regulations over the first half of the year. As I mentioned, since 1st July 2022, this year, we saw huge important amendments to the regulations. So we should stress that the regulators in the future shouldn't add uncertainty, especially in uncertain times, by changing tax regulations at very short notice, because it's obvious taxpayers simply need more time to adapt these systems to the new regulations. Second, policymakers shouldn't put short-term political objectives before long-term economic competitiveness. And for sure, when it comes to the Polish deal and its implementation, the policymakers, it should be clearly stated, they failed to take into account that the Polish tax system is already and was before the implementation of the Polish deal relatively complex. Just to give one example, Poland ranked 36 overall in the International Tax Competitiveness Index among 37 OECD members. So only Italy was ranked lower. And the Polish deal is actually evaluated as it increased the complexity of the Polish tax system. Last but not least, policymakers should take into account that the impact of tax reform should be analyzed not just from the perspective of the fiscal policy, but they should take a wider perspective, and they should also consider the impact of monetary policy and policy mix. So when you combine the 2 views, the 2 perspectives of fiscal policy and monetary policy. And it seems that the policymakers in Poland didn't take into account this monetary policy perspective. And now we see that these increasing interest rates were not taken into account. They were not forecast by the policy makers. If they were forecast, probably the decisions on changes in the tax regulations could have been different, especially in terms of this narrowing of the tax base. We should remember that in general, any decrease in public revenue might require a large hike in interest rates. And a large hike in interest rate that we already see in Poland, of course, poses a huge burden on indebted economic agents in Poland. So these are the recommendations for the future, because the policy that the tax reform has been already implemented, so there is not much to do about this. We should think rather about the future implementations or maybe amendments of the tax regulations. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Konrad. Now we heard all of the presentations, which were very interesting, and we were walking around Europe with these interesting topics. I suggest that we make a 10 minutes break, so we will continue at 5 p.m. So I would like to welcome you to join us on the round table, and we will also answer the questions which were put in chat by Damian Cyril Vertachnik. Thank you very much, Damian. So we won't forget your questions, and all other questions are welcome too. So everybody, let's make a break and see you in 10 minutes. Thank you very much. Okay, welcome back. We are starting the second part of our event, which is a roundtable with 4 interesting guests. 3 of them have already been introduced. These are Christina, Alexander, and Fabio. So coming from North Macedonia, Italy, representing also data from Bulgaria and Slovenia. And the 4th one is Dr. Mehmet Tosun, coming from the United States. He's a distinguished professor at the University of Nevada and other colleagues in universities. Dr. Tosun received a PhD in economics, and his research interests and expertise include public finance, regional economics, and economics, population, and demography. He's also a consultant in a number of national and international agencies, including World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and the United Nations Commissions. He also received numerous awards in his entire biography. He points to the numerous experiences, and we are glad to host you at our table, Professor Tosun. Welcome online, so we can now be very close, although being far away. And I suggest the structure of the roundtable in the form of firstly answering the questions which were put in a chat by one of the colleagues. Maybe also new ones will appear. So we prefer to answer the questions from the audience. And then also we have some questions if we have enough time. So maybe regarding the first question, then I suggest that you start with Fabio, for example.
Okay, thank you very much. In general, I will make a comment on all these questions, which were interesting, and in my opinion, they go exactly in that borderline, the study of taxation. There is economics, but it's also a bit of ethics. It's also a bit of the study of governance. It's a bit of constitution. It's a bit a very delicate area, in my opinion, that these questions are touching. Regarding more now specifically millionaires and let's say rich people and how to attract them or avoid them to leave one's country or the jurisdiction where they live, let's say, I would say that first of all, we have maybe to put the question a bit in perspective. I don't know, like, I don't want to go too much into the academic, but there's this idea that how much your profit or your income are taxed where you live can force you, can incentivize you enough to move away where the taxes are lower is a pretty old one. Usually in economics textbooks, it dates back to a paper from the late 50s. Since then, obviously, there have been a number of empirical studies to see if actually raising taxes, especially on high earners, has an impact, like, let's say, forces or incentivizes enough these people to move away from where they currently are. And I would say that most of the evidence is contradictory. There is the impression that maybe some high-profile people do it, but there isn't really across the board studies that tell us that this effect exists. So I would say that maybe there are some cases, but they are mostly anecdotal. So like, I don't know if we could really speak about a massive impact that migration caused by raising taxes in a jurisdiction actually exist. And moreover, I would say also that there is another aspect, which is, let's say, on the more ethical side of taxation, is that in a way, taxation is also related to the preferences of the community that taxes its members. So maybe in some jurisdictions, some cultures, for some people, it would be less acceptable for the state to ask more, for public authorities to ask more. And this, in some cultures, may actually lead to migration. But I don't think that, especially in most of the EU, this is actually such a big problem. I haven't seen, for instance, data that show it to be, let's say, an enormous problem at a scale. I've seen, for instance, that this can be more a problem in a federal state like the United States, where people can move easily from a state to another. But in the EU, I don't know if this is such a big problem. And after all, maybe most of these people were close to retirement, because moving away, you lose social networks, you lose business contacts, everything becomes difficult if you want to manage your job and your business from across a border, even if inside the European Union. So perhaps this question is most political, is more ethically relevant than it is maybe strictly economically speaking relevant. I would put some literature just for reference in the chat, so like can be useful.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much, Fabio. Yeah. So, did you wanted to mention anything else, or no? You finished with the yeah. Okay. So, thank you for your answer. So then we have the next question, which is more about or related to environmental tax. So here is the question: do you believe that green taxation hits developed countries and their citizens equally, or those who live in developing compared with those who live in developing countries, so third world countries? And for this case, I would kindly invite Professor Kešeljević maybe to comment on this question.
Okay, thank you, Dan. I will combine, because I can see that the next in line is also regarding the green taxation. How can we evoke economically challenged population understanding and acceptance of green taxation without lowering their living standards? So the idea of the green tax reform or introduction of the green taxes is to increase taxes on pollution, on use of resources, on everything what harms the environment. On the other side, basically, if you want to have fiscal neutral reform, you reduce taxes on income or social contribution. That was the general idea behind the so-called green tax reform in the middle of the 90s in the many European countries. So two negative effects come out of there. One is the effect on the competitiveness for the industry, and the second one is the issue of regressiveness. So why? Because if you, I don't know, increase the taxes on the motor vehicles, energy, basically there are regressive taxes, which means that people who have lower income will be hit the most. So these two effects, you have to neutralize them when you are basically implementing the reform. So how they did it in majority of countries, you have basically two approaches. You can do it ex ante, in advance, so it means that you will exempt someone from paying green tax, or you can do it ex ante. It means that you will let him to pay higher tax. He will be the burden will increase. However, ex post, you will give him some transfer or eco subsidies to the company, and in this way you will basically reduce his difficult position. So for example, I don't know, some things doesn't mean that your status will be deteriorated or your living standard. For example, I don't know, very plastic example. If you introduce a green tax, like for example, tax on the plastic bags, it's in many countries they introduce a tax on the plastic bags because they pollute the environment, it doesn't look good, and they introduce tax, I don't know, in €1, €2 on the plastic bags. So for this, what's the outcome? The outcome is if you change the behavioral pattern that instead of plastic bags you are using the paper bags, it won't affect your living standard, but you will accomplish the goal. So not all the green taxes will affect the living standards of the people. But for example, if you increase the price of energy, and this would increase the energy costs for the household, especially if elderly women who live in the single households. These are affected the most in Slovenia, who live in a big empty houses, which were built in the 70s. Then you have a problem here because they cannot, with the pension which they have, with the income which they have, they cannot change from that heating system, shall we say, to a more modern heating system, which will, shall we say, use less energy. So the question is how you will do it, okay? And this is some of the things which we are dealing, for example, in Slovenia, but different kind of transfer, different kind of contribution to those who are affected the most also increase or improves their living standards. So if you ask me, I would do it ex post afterwards. So for example, I don't know, renovating the house. It means you change the windows, you have to change the facade of the house, you have to install the certain new heating system. It's a huge cost, especially if you are elderly, if you live alone. So this green transition, the problem of progressiveness is there, and you should be aware as a policymaker of it, and you should find different ways how to help people who will find themselves in this position. Maybe very shortly.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Šeljević, for your answer. And now if we look further, so I will share back these slides where we have those questions. So we have now the third question, which is about that if should the European Union tax religious organization or non-profit organization. So not the members of the organization, but yeah, directly to the church and not-profit organization. So should these organizations should be taxed? And maybe for this question, I would kindly ask Professor Tosun, because yeah, Tosun, I know that you have also some experiences with Poland and Polish colleagues, and we know that Poland is also a very religious country. And maybe Professor Tosun, if you have any comments on this question. So thank you.
Sure, Dan, thanks. And it's a pleasure to be here. So great to see everybody, at least like virtually. Sorry, I didn't get a chance to participate in the first half of the workshop. And I got to tell you, it wasn't because I couldn't wake up. It's just that I had another actually meeting right before this. So, you know, that makes it very, very early here, of course. So it's not that early anymore. So I'm fine. Yeah, so Dan, again, thanks for letting me respond to that question. Of course, regarding Poland, I'm not going to call myself an expert in any way. So I was actually watching the last part of the presentation about Poland, which was great. So I actually learned, and I'm sure like I'll have some questions about that. But I can probably bring in more the American perspective to this, and I would like to, if I have time, maybe say something about the first question as well. So I really like, you know, Fabio's response to that, but I'll like to add to that. But regarding the taxing religious institutions, now in the US, if they have the nonprofit status and they have basically did the filing with the IRS to get the tax special tax status, then of course they don't pay the tax, right? So they don't pay the income tax that other groups are paying. Now, of course, we need to go a little bit to the theory to answer this question, like regarding like whether this is a good thing or bad thing. Now, the reason why, at least like from the theory, the economic perspective, why we have, let's say, tax breaks for certain institutions or for certain activities, usually lies with a public good or an externality or some like, which means like some market failure argument or a distributional argument. For example, so you deduct the charitable contributions from your income tax, you know, return, like when you file your return. for the income tax, because the well, I guess, like, maybe not everybody looks at it this way, but the reason why we have the tax break is that we are seeing the charitable contribution as a public good, which means something that has extensive, widespread positive externalities. And we know that the markets fail at providing these at the right amount, so the government is giving little extra incentive to provide that good, right? So like the typical public good argument. Now the question becomes, do we have the same public good argument with the religious institutions and the services that they provide? I mean, religious institutions, of course, provide help in terms of also the distributional goals, right? So like help the poor, provide food and sometimes shelter to poor population. So to the extent that you make that argument, okay, then you can justify an intervention by the government. In this case, the intervention is to actually remove the tax burden, like lower the tax liability. So again, it becomes a question of whether you have that positive externality or that public good characteristic. I mean, just to give you an example, also from the US and the income tax and the public good, the mortgage interest deductions, like for home ownership, actually is given with the same concept in mind. But the studies are showing that people does the home ownership bring better outcomes for the society, like better citizenship, better political participation, and so on. And the studies show that there's really not much there. So most economists, at least I should say public finance economists, and I'm saying this based on the National Tax Association surveys done, in recent years, public finance economists think that that's just a giveaway without really much justification. So again, it becomes a question about do we see that or not? And I'm really not familiar with the empirical literature about whether the religious institutions provide that public good. So that's my response. And very quickly about the first question, I agree with Fabio. So from the US, and you think that, again, US being a very decentralized system with such fiscal decentralization and federal structure, that maybe you will see more of the millionaire, flight of the millionaires, through the millionaire taxation. But again, the evidence is very much so mixed. And I see Fabio listed some of these studies from the US, from New Jersey, for instance, that we are not seeing this, let's say, escape or outflow of millionaires because there's a millionaire taxation. Well, California is also a good example. Probably the state with the highest possible income tax out there, right? Because you have the federal tax plus the state income tax, which is, I believe, the highest in the US right now. And there's an additional 1% surcharge on millionaires in California. Well, are they really escaping California? Well, some people make you think so, but California is a state that gives out a lot of people. So there's an outflow of people, but there's also an inflow at the same time. I mean, it's a state with 40 million people, and it has, one of the top, of course, tech firms and tech millionaires, or I should say billionaires, not millionaires, in the US and in the world. And they're not really leaving California, right? So we got to be careful. It is never tax, an income tax, or for a business tax is never the first thing people consider or businesses consider when they are thinking about relocating. There are many other factors. Of course, tax is an important factor too, but there are many other factors. I just wanted to note that as a response.
Thank you very much, Professor Tosun, for your comment. And maybe let's move to another question we have. I believe that the next question is more law-oriented, so I will share this now. So the next fourth question through the chat from the audience was, is it possible to create the European Union law that would force every EU member country to have the exact same taxation system and the same revenue structure. And maybe since we have also in our company here Professor Misheva, who is a lawyer and expert in, of course, law, I would like maybe to ask her if she has any comments on that question. So, Christina.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the question. It's interesting question, but EU cannot force anything. It just may recommend, or maybe it can put something. The tax law, it's a mark for every country. So it's nice to have a tax code, but it's very heavy to do the tax code since the tax law is a very fast changing law, and that's why the provisions and the rules that are imposed in the tax laws are separately divided. I think that I'm not sure, but I think that only 1 or 2 countries have a tax code, which makes the which is a kind of it's a kind of mark or indicator that we cannot say that it's possible to make in one country a tax code, and I don't think that the European Union can make or request the countries to fulfill the European Union regulation that is in tax law. It might be a kind of directives or recommendations, or maybe to follow some principles and standards, but not to oblige.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
I wanted to add something to the question for the taxation of the churches, I think. Or
okay, yeah, please, Christina.
Yes, our country, there was a situation in 2019. Our Macedonian church was under investigation from the Public Revenue Office, because most of the attractive positions for the constructions of buildings are more or less owners of these places or properties is the church. And there was a position in there was a situation where they wanted also to be investors for buildings and something similar that will put the church out of this or we put the church on the trade market. So also yes, it's maybe a public good, but when you have something that you value, if you value the candle, it's 10 dinars or 20 dinars, then you have a good that is on the market. So maybe we should add value added tax on that. I don't know.
Okay, thank you, Christina, for your comment. Maybe any of others discussants have some other questions or remarks, maybe as an answer to Christina, or maybe some additional comment. So because we have here another question, which is actually about if would the unification of the tax system, for example, in the EU, will lead to more equality between member states, or it would destroy a certain economy of individual nation in the European Union? Do you have any opinion on that? So let's say if the European Union decides to unify this tax policy across 27 countries, what do you think? It will destroy national economies within the EU or not?
This is for me? Okay. Well, I don't think that the small economies as our, let's say we have a small open economy, cannot follow the tax system that has let's say Norway. Norway, it's not a part of it, but let's say Sweden or France, or maybe I don't know, maybe some other, our Germany. We want to be as that states, but we are a transition country. So if we be part, if someday we are part of the EU, then it's hard to follow all these requirements that if the EU make a unification of taxation. I think that this is maybe a good idea, but it's a very wide and complex process that I don't think that it should be made of it. It was the same with the health union, but since we have now a health union and standards, maybe, I don't know, maybe we will do the same for the taxation as well.
Okay, thank you, Christina. Yeah, for comments. Maybe Professor Tosun, do you have maybe for us, for European Union, maybe some good solutions or suggestions from the United States experience?
Yeah, I don't know if I have, like good solutions or a silver bullet for you, Dan. I wish I can say that, but in response to your question, so I guess like there's a trade-off to what you're saying, right? So like on one side, by unifying or let's say harmonizing the taxes, you are preventing something that we are actually suffering from in the US, which is the race to the bottom argument, right? So like you have like 50 plus different tax systems in the US, right? So 50 states plus DC, and of course, like, many local governments, they have their own taxes. So again, US is a great example of fiscal decentralization. That's good, but the states, again, like, maybe to attract businesses, to attract like, millionaires and billionaires, they reduce taxes. But if everybody reduces, these businesses, they're basically looking around and saying that, well, like, everybody is as good or as bad from my perspective, and hey, plus I have other things to worry about before I get to the taxation, such as labor costs and skilled labor and things like that for my business before I actually think about taxation. So at the end, what happened is you have lower tax rates, so you actually reduced your tax capacity in a way, right? You're losing revenues, and you're still not attracting those businesses. So that's what we call the harmful tax competition, coming from this like race to the bottom type argument. So that's one side. But the other side is that, of course, so the TIBO was mentioned, I think, in the chat box. So the TIBO kind of like type competition is actually good, which means people like the tax and public service packages offered by different jurisdictions, right? So like states and, even like jurisdictions within the states. But that means that you need to have like different packages, which means like different tax rates. So like having a variation in the tax rates may be a good thing, because like some people may say, hey, I want to go to a place with a little bit higher property tax rates and income tax rates because I know the schools will be good and I have 5 kids and I want like good education for them. But if I'm a retiree, I may actually prefer to go to Florida or Nevada, my state, because there's no income tax. So that could be actually a very good option for them. So that could actually bring efficiency. So these two things, at the balance, I don't know which one really wins, because it's a big question and there are a lot of studies, and I don't think there's an absolute consensus on like which side wins, but both needs to be considered.
Yeah, I also believe it's very, let's say, complex questions and we need to look at such kind of questions from a more broader perspective. And yeah, I saw in the chat that Professor Kešeljević has also some comments on this question. So please.
Yes, I would just like to add something. I will continue where Mehmet stopped with this harmful tax competition. All these tax reports, which we have, tax competition report, basically implicitly assume that tax is not a good thing. I mean, paying tax is something very, very often you have a feeling when you read these kind of reports that, okay, we understand how tax structure is important. We understand the negative effects, the importance of transparency, neutrality, stability, simplicity. However, all the time when I'm reading these kind of reports, I have a feeling that behind there is something more, okay? And if you see where these tax reports are coming from, you will see that mainly behind are very influential institutes like Heritage, Fraser Foundation. So this is one thing. But coming back to the inequality in Europe, I think in Europe first we have to answer to the question: will Europe become a fiscal union or not? Okay, and so at the moment, countries who have euro, we are in monetary union, but there is no fiscal union. And we know whenever you have basically asymmetrical shock, this brings problems. We had the problem in the crisis in 2008, 2009, and we could see there is not solidarity between North and South, between the Swedish and between Greeks on the other side. So probably the first question is, what kind of Europe we would like to have? And do we really prepare to go one step further? Professor Mehmet will probably explain to us how long it takes in USA to build a fiscal union. So it's a process. We are at the moment stuck in between, somewhere between supranational organization and national state. Okay, we are stuck somewhere in between. And I think the second question is, in what kind of capitalism we would like to live in general? Is it more social democratic? We have in Europe, we have many different clusters of countries. On one side, we have social democratic group. For the Swedish, it's no problem to pay high taxes because they know the quality of service which they will have is high. The health service, the educational system. So if you ask the Swedish, probably they will agree to pay high taxes, or you will have large consent in the society. Okay, on the other side, you have countries which are more, shall we say, Anglo-Saxon or Mediterranean club, or shall we say continental group, which have different attitudes and different approach, or shall we say, different system or different capitalistic system. Okay, so what I'm trying to say is Europe, in spite of the fact it's unique, homogeneous, it's quite heterogeneous in a way. And to answer this, especially to answer the question of the future of the fiscal union, we largely determine then how we can help to reduce inequality between countries in Europe. Without that, you know, without the North understand that sometimes every country has North and South, and every country has less and more developed part. Without the fiscal union, I'm afraid that European Union has not have a bright perspective. And it doesn't look good if the things will continue like this. I'm afraid, but the situation doesn't look very good. Okay.
Okay, Professor Kašević, thank you very much for your comment. Maybe Fabio, do you have any other comments for this question, or can we go further?
No, and just what like from a broad overview, like I agree to more or less everything that was said before. I think there's a pretty sensible observation. I maybe would like to add that there is again a strong political component to all of what we are talking about now. Also the issue of the churches that was mentioned in the beginning of this round, but also now about where the EU wants to go in terms of fiscal union. Like these are questions that they have a component, let's say, of economic efficiency and of economically in terms of how to redistribute resources, but they basically have an underlying political component, which is like this thing, solidarity, or like taxing a church or not taxing a church. These are all things that need to rely on some common understanding of reality, a common understanding of living together. For instance, in the United States regarding churches, they more or less reached this common understanding on how to deal with it. Most states and most people in most states agree on how to tax churches. In Europe, this seems much more difficult when you still have countries that don't have separation between state and church. Similarly, when you have countries that have flat taxes and others that have the mandate to have progressive taxation in the constitution. So like, I think maybe this is an issue that we are still one step behind the Americans in this sense. We still have a cultural and a political issue to solve. And then after this step, we could maybe think about how to design it economically speaking.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Fabio, also for your comment. And now maybe I suggest that we move our debate a bit further, or let's say, yeah, a bit further. I will now share my slides again, and maybe just to just to remember some things we were actually talking also about during the presentation. So I'm now again carrying this tax competitiveness index or rankings of countries. And yeah, as I already mentioned during my presentation, it's of course obvious that, for example, Baltic states, which are actually new member states, you know, such as Estonia and Latvia, have the most competitive tax system. However, on the other hand, we see that especially Mediterranean countries such as France, Italy, Portugal have the least competitive tax system. So maybe here, what do you think, that maybe old member states should learn from the newest one, or should it be the other way, or what do you think? But I believe that according to these results, the old member states maybe should adopt some good practices from new member states. Maybe do you have some comments, maybe Professor Kešeljević, you have any ideas?
Yeah, regarding these rankings, I think it's a bit problematic, like Professor Mehmet said, it's race to the bottom. You know, it's like the race, you are chasing the others, but you can all run in the same direction. But if they run fast, you have to run even faster. So if you want to improve your relative position. So if they reduce taxes, you have to reduce even more to be to get higher ranking on this list. So I think it's much more behind than just to be focused on taxes, especially Fabio and Mehmet talk about that, how important are other factors in attracting foreign direct investments and other issues. And I don't think we should simplify things too much, like there is a very simple transmission from taxes to foreign direct investments, from taxes to the migration of people, and etc., etc. For example, I don't know, people, if we take some other rankings where people are, for example, the most happy, you will see that people are the most happy in Scandinavian countries in Europe, in spite of the climate, in spite that half of the year they live in dark. But people are the most happy where they have very high taxes. So it's much more behind that. And I think that it's more important the quality of service which you get in exchange for paying taxes. Okay, so what kind of the quality of services which you get at the end of the day? I think this would be much more important. And if you look all these tax competition reports, like I said before, it's always an assumption behind that the lower the tax, the better it is. But I'm very skeptical regarding these reports. They are useful, they have high quality data, you get an overview of the tax system, but to use it as a policy instrument, as an advice what to do in your country, I would be very careful regarding that. I wouldn't take it so easily, because, you know, when everyone is using the same recipe, then you have race to the bottom. But if you want to be unique, you have to do things differently than the others. So this is my general objection when I'm looking at this kind of rankings in general.
Okay, thank you, Professor Kešeljević. So I saw, Professor Tosun, do you also have some comments? I saw that you yourself.
Well, I largely agree with Alexander, if I may. I mean, absolutely. So, like, this could be true, right? So, like, Tax Foundation, you know, came up with these with this index, and then okay, so they're releasing the report, so that's all good, and they're tracking over time, so that's all good. But I wouldn't be comfortable, people looking at it and say that, well, okay, what was that? Estonia and Latvia have very high tax competitiveness, so we should make Italy, France, and Portugal decrease their tax rates to basically be like. I don't think that works well. That's a dangerous, in a way, policy recommendation. So in a way, what you do, I mean, I take this as data, right? But what you do with this data is really important. So, like, again, if you're basically using this to justify your agenda about, like, you know, hey, we need to, like, lower taxes in Northern Europe because they're too high, as Alexander was saying, that well, they also rank very high in the happiness index. They have great education systems. I mean, you talk to them and they, at least if not all, a lot of them say that I'm okay with paying high taxes. I get good education and healthcare. Can you say the same thing about the US? A lot of people are really complaining about the education system and the healthcare system. And I see that US is ranked much lower, I guess, like compared to some of these countries in the index. So again, we need to be careful. And another comment I will make is, I'm not going to say that I'm very familiar with this report. So there's this important kind of distinction between the using the statutory tax rates, which is tax rate reported by the government, the typical, you look at the tax code and you see these tax rates, as opposed to the effective tax rates. So let's say you see a corporate tax rate that is 30%. That is very likely not the tax rate that the corporations are paying. So I don't know if they really paid close attention to what the corporations are actually paying effectively, because that could also, especially if you're using this data, let's say, so I'm going to use tax rates in a regression to explain something, let's say inequality. So what is the relation between corporate tax rates and inequality? Which one would you use? Would you use just the reported statutory tax rates, or what the tax rates that the corporations are effectively paying after all the tax breaks, exemptions, and so on? So I don't want to put any blame on anybody regarding this report or the index, but I'm just curious about that.
Dan, if I may, just a short remark. I will just add where Mehmet stopped.
Yeah,
this distinction between official and official tax rate and basically actual tax rate which you pay. For example, I just looked for Slovenia in this report. So it's written like the corporate tax is 18%. It's relatively low, okay? But the effective tax rate is 11%. So basically, it's one of the lowest. Okay, so if you just focus on the nominal tax rate and not on the effective tax rate, you get the wrong signal, because the subsidies which are given to those companies by the companies, all this basically is some kind of funds which you give back from the government, and it should be pay attention to that as well. So I just wanted to continue where Mehmet stopped, because that was in line with his argument.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I also saw that Mr. Fabio, that you raised the hand. So if you have any comments, please go ahead.
I wanted to say that, for instance, what was said until now was also very in line with the things I was speaking about in my presentation. So I also shared this idea that at the end of the day, most people as well as companies don't care so much about how much they're paying, but they care about the utility of what they're paying. So if what they are getting in terms of service, in terms of public goods provided by the public authorities are worth the taxes they are paying, most likely they will be very prone to pay it, as opposed to go somewhere like, for instance, in Bulgaria, where they will pay an effective rate of 9%. Then there are accidents on the highways every other day. There aren't even guardrails. Maybe you will think about it a bit more. And also I wanted to go maybe in a aspect of the report, which maybe I would like also Professor Tosun to comment on it, because it was a bit hidden in the methodology. Essentially, one of my remarks would be on the fact that this report speaks a lot about tax neutrality. So with this idea that taxes shouldn't distort the allocation, the choices that we would have had without taxes. On the one hand, I would like to ask also to my other colleagues if they think that maybe this approach is a bit dated nowadays. Like before we were speaking about green taxes, the entire idea of the green tax is to distort a choice. Is to distort my choice that I will do normally of using the plastic bag and divert it towards a biodegradable bag or a paper bag, even if normally it's more expensive. And so so its neutrality really an aim that we should try to pursue anymore today, or maybe we should stop focusing so much on it because our societies are going towards different objectives. And another point is that, is this report really measuring neutrality? For instance, they use the notional interest deduction. but there are researches nowadays that have shown that actually changing it doesn't actually change so much, especially in the case of Belgium, which had a big reform on the notional interest deduction recently, doesn't really change companies' behavior so much. So should we still consider it, even if at all we want to speak about neutrality? And maybe so I would like to ask maybe a bit more forcefully than Professor Tosun, which agenda is really this report pursuing? Is it really trying to give a representation of reality, or is trying to push a message?
Okay, Fabio, thank you very much for your comment. Maybe at this in this context, for example, in the context of North Macedonia as a country, as a candidate, European Union country, maybe I will ask Christina, what do you maybe think about whether the accession of North Macedonia to the EU will affect the tax system in your country, in North Macedonia, or not? Will there be any changes or not? What do you think?
Well, I think there are going to be a lot of changes. But I was thinking about this report that also everyone has commented on it. So I saw a kind of ranking for North Macedonia, competitiveness rank. It's from Trading Economics.
Close one, you know.
So in 2018, we were like 80 on the 82nd place, yes, from 140 countries that were ranked in 2019. And this is measured by several, they are using methodology that emphasize the role of humanity capital, the innovation, the resilience, and there are a lot of indicators that are involved. So I won't be so sharp in saying that they don't make any kind of indication on where is the rank of the country. Maybe those calculations should be taken in consider about it, because also the OECD competitiveness in Southeastern Europe is measuring our country, and there is a report by saying that the country, in this report, the economy is based is dominated by services, and they say that 45.5% of the gross domestic products, this is measured by the World Bank, and 55% of employment is the one that are in this economy that the services are dominated for. So we may say that this includes a lot of indicators that maybe we should consider. How can we catch up all this by following the EU? Our country at the moment is more, let's say, in depth, and they are trying to cover the government debt by issuing the €8 bond, and this is a loan that is worth for €500 million. So this debt was used to refinance the third Euro bond from 2015 euro, and I think that that worth for 500 million. So that's why we need to see that the strategy and the financial risk of the countries should be should consider this indexing. While I'm speaking about our country, I don't see in this index and in this table that you have at the end, but I guess that is because we are not part of the EU and
OECD, of course, and at this let's say in this context, I also wanted maybe to ask you if you have any feeling or experiences or maybe knowledge, how would you how would you assess the tax competitiveness of North Macedonia? So how you will place, for example, let's say North Macedonia within these rankings? Do you have any feeling about that, or what would it North Macedonia be?
Well, I cannot
more like Estonia and Latvia, or maybe more like France, Italy?
Okay, so what about Estonia? Sorry.
I'm asking you if North Macedonian tax system will be more like Estonian and Latvian, so very competitive, or less competitive, like in Italy or France. What do you think?
Well, I cannot compare with Estonia and Latvia. Honestly, I haven't done that kind of analysis, but I can compare with Western Balkan countries. And we may say that we are more competitive with the Western Balkan countries, except that we have a little. I'm just wanted to see the scores for North Macedonia for 2018 and 21 compared to the average Western Balkan countries. Those are 6 countries. So the scores are more or less. Let's say we have score from 0 to 5. We have score 5 for trade policy, for tax policy, and almost for energy policy for 21st. Maybe these plans and programs that the government has, this frame of base erosion and profit shifting, it will be something that could say that our economy is, let's say, middle competitive, but it's more competitive to the Western Balkan countries that are here in the region. But I cannot compare it with the rest of the Baltic countries.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Christina, for your comment. So if we maybe proceed with this index, maybe I saw some interesting things from these rankings, which I already marked here. So here, accordingly, I have maybe some questions for Professor Tosun and Professor Kršeljević, because if you look at this table, especially at this column showing corporate tax rank, for example, we can see that Slovenia is on 7th place, while the United States is on 22nd place. And here for consumption tax rank, for consumption taxes, you can see it's opposite way. We can see that the United States takes the better position than Slovenia. And here are actually my questions, or I would like to ask you to comment if you have any ideas. Why do you think that these differences between Slovenia and United States exist? Maybe is that if we move, let's say, to the consumption tax rank, is it maybe because of differences in value added tax versus sales tax, which you have in the US? Maybe it's
absolutely
or easier,
that's very easy then. United States is the only, I believe, only industrialized country that does not have a VAT. And if you, well, I'll let you basically tell me like what the average tax rate will be with the VAT, but I'm saying definitely double digit. I know like we have exports that are 0 rated and there's a variation in the rates, but typically a VAT is something with a relatively high tax rate. But the sales tax that we have, which says, let's say that that's in lieu of the consumption tax that you have in other countries, we have the sales tax, which is at the state and local level, by the way. We don't have a federal sales tax either. Those tax rates are typically less than 10%. Like the one we have in Nevada is 6.85 statewide, and then localities add more to it. It still adds up to about 8.5%. So that's, I'm assuming, unless like I'm missing something else, that is the explanation for that difference. Because US does not have a VAT, and that's a big, of course, consumption tax. Now on the corporate side, maybe quickly. So yeah, I mean, it could be because US used to have, of course, like a very high corporate tax rates, but it was reduced by the previous administration and being raised a little bit by this administration. So US is still sort of in a bit of a flux regarding the corporate tax policy. It is difficult for the US to reduce the corporate tax rate. Well, by the way, it will still depend on the political process, so who knows about the future, but it is difficult because in the US there's a lot of I guess response, maybe a better way to put it, protests from the public regarding corporate profits that have, of course, like, with the sectors such as pharmaceutical and tech, these mega corporations making mega profits, and if you're basically as a political administration reducing the tax rates too much, that basically creates a lot of backlash. So that probably maintains the tax rate a little bit higher than everybody else. But again, there were actually elections here, as you probably heard. It was completed yesterday, but we still don't know the results fully yet. The politics change, quite a bit in the US and very quickly. So you never know.
Okay, thank you, Mehmet. So what then for the EU, maybe in order to get a better position in consumption tax rank, maybe we should also apply a sales tax instead of value-added tax. Maybe, I don't know if this is a good solution. So maybe at this place, I will ask Professor Kešeljević if you have any comments about value-added tax and sales tax. Would sales tax be okay for the European Union context?
No, I don't think so. we shouldn't go back. I mean, don't forget the value-added tax is the only tax in European Union which is harmonized at the European Union level. All other taxes are in the domain of the national governments. This is the only tax where you have the minimum rate for the standard one and for the lower one. You can go, it can be beyond, but it cannot go below. So I think more steps would be probably needed in terms of additional harmonization of taxes, probably some kind of, we had initiative from Stiglitz, the letter which was sent to Biden about how to introduce a certain kind of tax on the multinationals. That would be an interesting thing to see. So I think if I look here, the data for United States and for Slovenia, the difference was before Biden even larger, because the Trump reduced the corporate tax. I think it was about 35%, even it was much higher. In Slovenia, this is 18%, but effective tax rate is 11%. So, for example, when foreign direct investors come to Slovenia, I work for the Prime Minister office for 4 years, and I had a lot of experience with foreign direct investors which wanted to invest in Slovenia. So Slovenia has very low corporate tax, but the people from Slovenia will tell you how unsuccessful we were in attracting foreign direct investments in the past 30 years. Not even one large investment, okay? So when foreign direct investors, when they come to the country, there is a number of elements which they are interested in. This data about how high the taxes are, they can see from the reports like tax competitiveness report, but they are more interested in other more subtle implicit signals, okay? How reliable partner you will be in this process. There will be a political commitment behind who will push these foreign direct investments further. Will they have any bureaucracy, time lag, how reliable you are in transporting, for example, for a Japanese company which come to Slovenia, the most important question was, because they have just in time, it doesn't mean in the shortest time, but it means when they will say the goods will be there, they will be supplied there. The most important question was how the port functions and what is the infrastructure, the quality of infrastructure from the port to the factory. So many other elements which are much more important than this one, which you can easily get from different kinds of reports. So this is why these reports are good, to get the first insight. but afterwards it's much more there. For example, they never ask us about the labor cost, okay, because the value added which they have was 150,000. So for them, basically the wage labor costs were not a factor of decision. In spite of that, people generally believe this is an important decision factor. For this type of production, for this type of company, that was not important. All other things were more important. Okay.
Okay, so thank you for the comment. Maybe at this place, if I may, Fabio, because you come from Italy, right? And here we can see that Italy ranks at the end of this scale, and maybe a short comment or a short question for you about what do you think, why are the reasons, maybe if you have this idea, what are the reasons why Italia is below at the end of this rating?
Thank you. As I was mentioning also before, like it's before I was born, I'm 24 years old, that in Italy, politicians and economists are speaking about reducing or cutting taxes. It's a very old topic. I would say that like some maybe pointers to why, let's say, this bad ranking would be like, for a long time, Italy, like France, were two countries that were capitalist, but the state had a very big role in the economy. Like the state owned the entire companies that nowadays are private and some bankrupted under private ownership, but they were pretty flourishing under public ownership. They had some of the biggest steel-making plants in Europe, for instance, and nowadays they are mostly closed, one in the city where I was born. So I think for a large chunk is due to this. Another part is due to the fact that the welfare state in Italy is pretty much more omnicomprehensive than in other European countries. There is a universal healthcare system, which, for instance, in Austria is not like this. And also the system covers whoever, even people who are not Italian. Just because you are on Italian soil, you have right to universal healthcare. So it becomes much more expensive, especially for a country that welcomes an enormous number of migrants, legal and illegal, every year. And then I would say maybe I was reading in the slides regarding ownership and especially the ownership of unmoving assets. Well, it's also because in Italy, basically 70%, according to the last data, of families, of households, own the house in which they live. So like this is a very attractive area from which the state public authorities can extract funds, more or less striking everyone. So it applies the classical saying in Italy that if you make everyone unhappy, in the end, you didn't make anyone unhappy. And moreover, I would say last thing, maybe the great financial crisis that we had recently and the Eurozone crisis, there was significant increase in public revenues, which was not matched by an increase in public expenditures. So an increase in public investment. And this could also explain why taxes have remained high, but overall the country remains uncompetitive.
Okay, thank you very much, Fabio, for this comment. And yeah, maybe if we move forward, so away from this tax index report. So the next, let's say, slide, or I will expect some comments from your side, is the topic regarding the taxation of the digital economy. Here on this slide, I have listed some key facts about the economy, which is becoming more and more digitalized. So the first fact is that digital companies are growing very fast. Then the second one, digital companies rely less on physical presence because of we have different platforms through which companies may provide their or offer their services and goods. And of course, the last fact is about the digital companies often pay lower tax rates than the other, let's say, non-digital companies. And for example, Europe has been, or policymakers in Europe has been unhappy with the tax habits of some of United States tech giants, for example, Amazon, Google, and Apple. So policy makers often noted that these firms make large amounts of money from European citizens, but pay little tax. So maybe this can be the starting point for our next round of the debate. And maybe at this point, I will ask Mehmet about, so Professor Tosun, do you have any comments on, let's say, firms from your country, such as Amazon, Google, and Apple, and about their tax practices here in Europe?
Yes, of course. Like, you know, the what we call tax avoidance. I'm not going to get into the evasion part, but there could be some evasion, obviously. But the tax avoidance behavior by these companies that are, of course, like, you know, global brands. You know, it all brings up the question about international tax coordination, because they do bypass the tax systems fairly easily, right? I mean, these companies have been, you know, heavily criticized, like regarding paying very little taxes in the U.S. You know, of course, despite you know, profits, you know, billions of dollars of profits, and you know, and of course, like, you know, the tax haven issue, right? So all these things, of course, bring up the international tax coordination, which obviously is also a big question. But I will say, I'll just like keep it very simply at the need for more coordination regarding like these multinational companies, the profits generated in different places. So a while ago, I think some of you will remember this, I invited in a digital platform like this, I invited this lecturer that was the head of the fiscal affairs division at IMF, Italian economist Vito Tanzi. And the topic, as you may remember, was you know, something like, is the world ready for a world tax organization? And his point was also like regarding all these things that are like, you know, with the globalization, with the mobility of you know, corporations or corporate profits, you know, it becomes important for some degree of coordination between the companies. I don't know if a world tax organization is feasible in the foreseeable future, but it definitely it needs a discussion.
So yeah, Professor Tosun, thank you for your comment. So then I think, yeah, that also European policy makers should, let's say, pay attention to tax practices of those companies, because if the profits are not, let's say, taxed in an appropriate way, then let's say we are losing the tax revenue, which is of course crucial for financing public goods at the end of the day. And maybe here is also at this point, maybe I will also ask Professor Alexander Kishelevich if he has any additional, let's say, comments. So do you think that policymakers in the European Union pay attention to those tech companies or not, or they should, let's say, give more effort into this in order to not lose the tax revenue for the European Union?
Well, if we look at the European Union, why? I mean, if we say, okay, European Union is here to preserve peace in Europe, to be more competitive regarding the USA and China. But the third reason is also when you have economic globalization, like you have free trade, free movement of people, the only way how you can control this is that you have an authority on the supranational level, and this is European Union. So basically, if you want to have in a globalized world, supranational institution can be part of the solution. And European Union is such an experiment where we tried in a certain region in Europe, we tried to build, shall we say, a political umbrella over the economic globalization, which is happening with free trade, free movement of people, capital, services, and etc. And only at this supranational level, Mehmet went one step further, and he said we need that on the world level, on the global level. Okay, but already on the regional level, I think this is the first pit stop, where you can do something on the European Union level regarding this, how to overcome this problem. If we are more ambitious, then the world level would be the next step. But this, I'm afraid that we don't have a global governance at the moment. We need some kind of Bretton Woods #2, about which you can agree about the rules of the game for the next period. We have a couple of crises here: financial crisis 2008, COVID in 2020. Now we have energy crisis with Ukraine. In all these examples, governments injected huge amount of taxpayers' money into the system, and somebody has to pay at the end of the day, and the burden should be more equally distributed also to the corporate actors like these multinational companies. I'm pretty sure about that.
Okay, so thank you very much, Professor Kashilevich. And I've just here received a message from Professor Tosun. So Tosun, you are leaving us now because you have other obligations, right?
Yes, I'm really sorry. This is a great discussion, and I love it. And we should definitely explore maybe ways to continue the conversation some other time. We'll be happy to organize something on our end as well in the future. But I really need to, leave for my next meeting. But thank you, Dan, and thank you for all the participants.
Thank you very much, Professor Tosun. So we wish you a nice, pleasant day in the United States. So thank you very much for participating. And yeah, let's maybe continue maybe with other two participants. Maybe do you have any other comments related to the digitalization of taxation of digital economy? Sorry, do you have any comments on that?
I have one comment just to say that the ICT sector is a faster and growing sector here also in our country. Do you hear me, Dan?
Yes, I can hear you.
Because my computer is about to restart in 7 minutes. So, we have this growth rate for 71% in the last 3 years. And many large companies like ICT companies, Microsoft, Cisco, and Apple, they already have branches here in our country. And also this, I should mention that the total value of ICT exports has 0.3 share in the total exports for 2019 in North Macedonia. So it is expected that this should grow. But we may say that the country gives exemptions, or maybe this is more incentives that makes for this industry, for the IT industry, by trying to exempt the personal income that is from the IT industry to be on a 0 rate for the personal income. And that is planned by the personal income law, and it is expected to be implemented in 2023. Also the ICT companies are very, this is the technology industry, and the development is mostly present in these free economic zones, because most of the companies are relying on all that incentives that the government is giving to the foreign companies.
Thank you very much for your comment. And now I think Nina has some questions for our participants. So Nina, please.
Yes, I would like to ask maybe Fabio and Alexander, is there already a severe need for any tax reforms due to all this last crisis? We already mentioned some, COVID, Ukraine war, energy crisis. So we also heard the colleague from Poland, but is there really anything serious happening in that way, or we will just continue with the same tax systems and use what is needed to finance all these measures. Fabio, maybe?
Yes. I think like maybe it's a bit difficult to speak generally about even just all the countries of the European Union. Like I would say that maybe it's relatively easy to single out some countries that are actually in need of deep structural reforms. Bulgaria, as we were saying before, is one such case, but also Romania. And I would say that in relation to all the crises that you were mentioning, I think that these crises are compounding the need for a reform. They don't create it. These are not reforms that started being necessary yesterday or the day before yesterday, but as the systems, the economic system in general, in Europe and in the world, starts slowing down and starts showing signs of weakness, these errors and these problems that already existed are becoming more and more relevant, and they are compounding the need for a serious structural reform.
Thank you very much. Alexander, please.
If we look how the public debt has increased in many European countries due to the fiscal measures which were taken, and first thing what they did to suspend the fiscal rules for a certain period of time. Okay, I think it was a logical step, and how we will continue from here further on. People see that people will be more and more frustrated also because of the inflation and with the declining purchasing power of their income. So this is some kind of inflation tax. Don't forget the taxes can also be in different forms. Inflation tax is a typical example. And I don't think that will be more and more pressure on the changing the structure to be in a way more progressive, to put higher tax on wealth, especially on wealth, because you have income inequality of income and inequality of wealth. And usually we are focused on income, but not on wealth. Again, situation in different countries is different, but nevertheless, I think that there will be more and more, the pressure will be put on the governments where to find additional funds to close the budgets. And I don't see other option as to increase taxes. In the short term, that would be a solution until we will go over the situation. But as Fabio said before, predictability and gradualness in tax reform is important because it gives you time to adopt. All the good tax reforms give certain subjects, companies or time to adapt to the change. So I think that I don't see any other solution. For example, in Slovenia, we have very low tax on the real estate. Okay? We have very high income tax and very high social contributions, but we have very low real estate tax. So to put the tax on the real estate, it's a good solution because you cannot move the house to some other countries. So in difference to capital, which can move freely around, the houses and the real estate, you cannot move them from one country to another. So these are things which are perfectly to be taxed. If you have, for example, tax, just to get a feeling, tax for 100 square meters of apartment in Ljubljana, tax on a yearly basis is around 150 euros. So if you put in percentage point, that's 0.05%. It's close to zero, okay? So I think that every country will find a solution to change maybe the tax structure in a way to go from direct to indirect, and maybe to increase taxes. For example, in Slovenia, I would advise the government to increase the real estate tax, but nobody wants to do that. Why? Because 95% of all the people in Slovenia live in their own apartments and houses. Renting market almost does not exist. So that's the reason why, if you want to lose the elections, then you will go for the real estate tax. That's for sure. That's the reality at the end of the day.
Okay. Thank you very much. So the day was quite long. I suggest that we finish at this point, and many thanks to all authors and other participants. I'm glad that we touched also some other topics, not only taxes, which can be quite boring and or even scary for an average citizen. We touched the quality of life, quality of services, sustainability, which are also related to taxations. So at this point, I would kindly ask you to read also our publication, which was carefully prepared by our authors and will be posted on ELF, European Liberal Forum, and Zavod 14 pages. I would also like to invite you to our next event, which will be held on 30th of November with the main topic, Green and Smart Europe. So warmly welcome. Thank you again to all the authors and other participants, and have a nice evening and the rest of the year.
Yeah, thank you very much for all the participants and of course also the audience. So thank you for participating in this event, and see you soon at the end of this month.